We do appear to have a quorum. I will call this meeting of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board to order for October 4th, 2021. Reva, if you would please call the roll.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Keith Furman.
Present.
Barbara Harrington McKinney. Randy Udell. Christopher McCahill.
Here.
Tom Wilson.
Here.
Baltazar Deanna Satana.
Here.
Margaret Bergamini. Vedrinath Lankawa. And Carolyn McAndrews.
Here.
Thank you, Reva. We do have a quorum. Joe, if you would please proceed with our standard virtual meetings opening statement.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the board may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a welcome to Carolyn or Carrie McAndrews, the newest member of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. Carrie is an associate professor in the Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her fields of research are transportation planning, policy, and design. Her research seeks to understand how emerging health, safety, and environmental goals become part of mainstream transportation decision-making. Equity is central to those goals, and her research analyzes the distribution of transportation's health impact, as well as how people organize to influence transportation decision-making. Just click. So welcome, Carolyn. If you'd like to take a few moments here to add to the intro or say hello, please feel free to do so.
I just want to say thanks very much for the welcome, and it's a real honor to join everybody here, and I'm very excited to serve the board and the city.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. All right, approval of minutes from September 20th, 2021. Assuming all board members have had a chance to review those if they so chose, is there a motion to approve? Chris, is that a motion?
Yeah, move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving our minutes from September 20th, 2021, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that will be unanimous. Thank you. Are there any communications, disclosures, or recusals from members of the board? Please use the hand raise feature. Seeing no hands raised, we do have one registered for public comment for items not on the agenda, Bob Schaefer. Bob, you may begin when you're ready. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I found the unmute. Thank you. Yes, I do have a comment on that deals with the BRT plan, and that at the last meeting, I questioned what the need was for the 60-foot buses. And if I understood Mr. Chavala, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, that he indicated that the need for the buses were that they were planning on 50,000 ridership on a daily basis. And so I did some math on that. Using the weekday numbers of 261 weekdays, that amounts to 13,050,000 riders total for the year. That I want to bring to the attention that in 2019, the total ridership was 12,856,514, according to the annual report. So that it has been my opinion all along that there has not been any data to support the BRT process. That I have long suggested that even during the pandemic, that the city take a few buses and label them BRT just to see what the ridership would be. I think that what is lacking in it is any definite commitment by people or even research to find out what the ridership is going to be and that. So I think that we're moving ahead on something that is lacking in data. A lot of good concepts maybe, but there's a lot of things that, in my opinion, have not been fully researched in it. And so I think it's a kind of a, well, let's see if it happens, or sort of like Field of Dreams. And I don't mean any disrespect by that. I mean, I just looking at the facts, and the facts don't support it.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, before we go to the director's report, a couple of extra housekeeping things here. So we do have 9 members with 1 absent and 1 vacancy. So both alternate members are in voting status for the duration of the meeting. And then I also see that we have Chair Kovich from the Transportation Commission here. Without objection, I'd like to allow her to speak on items if she wants to. And then if any other members of the Transportation Commission do join, the same for them as well. Seeing no objection to that. Move on to our first item for the evening then, Legistar 67562, Director's Report.
Hello. It's been just 2 weeks since I delivered my last director's report, so I'll be brief. Perhaps the biggest bit of news was going to be the passage of an infrastructure bill in Congress. You're not aware that got postponed. The reason why that's of interest to us is because we do have some transportation projects, specifically Atwood Avenue, Autumn Ridge Overpass, that are kind of tied in somewhat. Their future's tied, or possible funding for them is tied into these. So that's that. The other items, specifically BRT, as well as a transit network redesign, Vision Zero. We have been very active. But most of those topics are agenda items on tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting probably will be a long one. I think it'll be a very interesting one because there's a lot of good content, but I think I'm going to yield the rest of the report so that you can hear in more depth from each individual agenda item.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions for Tom? Seeing none, we'll move on then to Legistar 67564, Transit Network Redesign Alternative Balance.
Thank you. I'm Mike Chakvala, transit planner with the city's transportation department. So there's a fairly major step that we need to take today, which is to get direction on the coverage to ridership split. So we're on phase 2 of this 3-phase project. We have representatives from Jarrett Walker and Associates here to walk through some information. So we've presented to this board maybe about a month ago or 2, showing the coverage ridership maps. So we're showing you some of the results of the outreach we've done, and I'll go ahead and let Daniel take the floor if you're available, Daniel.
Hi, yes. Thanks, Mike. And just give me 1 second and I will get this up in front of you. I have a PowerPoint to present this evening. I'm going to try to get through it relatively promptly so that we can then have any necessary discussion. Let's see, here we go. All right, can you see this PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Daniel Costantino. I'm with Jarrett Walker and Associates. I'm a principal, a project manager, transit planner, and I've said this before, but just in case anyone hasn't heard it, we're a transit network consulting firm. We help cities like Madison, agencies like Metro Transit figure out what to do when they want to review their network. And I'm here tonight with Christopher Yuen, who is the lead analyst on this project and has done a lot of the background work that underlies this. So what's this study about? Just as a reminder, basically the network redesign is about re-envisioning where and how often the bus operates in Madison. And maybe more specifically, I should say, it's about re-envisioning where and how often the bus operates in Madison in the context of the resources that are already available. Because I think perhaps for some, it will be obvious that we should just have more service, but that's not what is on the table in this project. So when we're dealing with a situation of figuring out where to run the bus and how often within an existing budget, we're inevitably put in front of this trade-off on how to spend our resources between whether service should be as frequent and direct as possible so that it is as useful as possible to many people, which means that you usually get the highest ridership possible out of it, or whether service should be designed to be available within a short walk of as many places as you can get to, so that almost anyone might have basic insurance against isolation. So this is a trade-off that I've presented before. I'm not going to go in depth on it tonight, but you may recall from my last presentation that I showed you two alternatives that contrast what the two ends of the spectrum might look like in Madison. So those were prepared. We are just coming out of a couple months of public outreach on this. And so I'm going to show you kind of a quick reminder of what was in the alternatives, followed by what we heard from the public, primarily through an online survey. And then happy to talk more about it. And then we're going to seek your direction on how to turn the alternatives plus the input into a draft plan. So basic assumptions that underlie this. I mentioned the budget thing. Another thing is the BRT. This whole exercise is predicated on the notion that the BRT is happening in the same time frame. So we're assuming the East-West BRT as well as a future North-South BRT and some sort of BRT service to Middleton. We're also assuming that we're working within existing resources, by which we really mean 2019 resources. The goal is to restore the total level of service that was available pre-COVID, but there are no new funds to create new service that wasn't there before, which has some important implications. The main one being that means that any decision to run more service somewhere than was there in 2019 is a decision to run less service somewhere else. And also, because there's BRT, a substantial portion of the network's resources will be going into operating BRT. Now, there are two alternatives, and they are both somewhat different from the existing network. They're both realistic. They're both designed so that, if you today said, do this to Metro, they could implement it in 6 or 9 months. But we're not actually expecting either of these alternatives to be exactly what anyone wants. They're meant to illustrate the two ends of the spectrum, and so they're meant to be provocative so that people can react to it, tell us which way they lean, and tell us kind of what's wrong or what's missing in the one they prefer. So, quick overview. Here is the existing network in Madison. So as you may recall, this is a map of the bus network as it exists right now, 2020 and early 2021. The lines on this map are color-coded by frequency. If a line is red, that means you have a frequent service that runs every 15 minutes or better. If a line is in the very saturated, slightly darker blue, that means it's running every 30 minutes, typically on weekdays. And if it's in a lighter shade of blue, it means it's only running once an hour. And you may also see, if you squint a little, that there are some routes in a kind of gold, light, very light color. And those are services that are only available at certain times of day, usually peak hours. A couple routes only available on weekends or evenings, but mostly that's peak only service. So this is your existing network, and you can see that it is really dominated by routes that run more or less every 30 minutes on weekdays, with some of your outlying areas served by less frequent, maybe hourly or peak-only type service. And there is not a lot of service that's deliberately designed to be frequent. Really, it's mostly on campus and a little bit of places where, many 30-minute routes may overlap, particularly in the isthmus. So that's the existing network. And now I'm going to show you the ridership alternative. Existing ridership. I'm going to go back and forth a couple times. Existing ridership alternative. Existing ridership alternative. So the key contrast to notice here is obviously that there are far fewer lines on this map than there are right now. They do go about as far out into outlying areas of Madison as the current system, but there are fewer of them, and they're also generally more frequent than what's available right now. And those things are related, because to run a bus frequently, you need more buses, which means you can run fewer other routes. So the way that the ridership alternative would work is that service would be designed to be as frequent as possible, meaning every 15 minutes wherever possible, and every 30 minutes in where it's not. And that all routes are also designed to be direct from one end of Madison to the other. So you can see obviously the east-west BRT, this A line here. You can also see this B line, which would be something like the north-south BRT, that would become the north-south BRT. But you can see this also in other less prominent lines. Like, for example, you can see that this D route here, it starts out as a couple of branches in southwestern Madison that run every 30 minutes. They come together and form a single route that runs every 15 minutes to downtown, all the way through downtown on Williamson, through the isthmus, and then up, and then goes one branch to the airport and one branch out to the East Madison somewhat. And so all the lines, if you follow them, are really intended to go very far. And this means that the ridership alternative also implies that you wouldn't need the transfer points that exist now for people who live in outlying areas to connect if they want to go downtown or to the other side of town. So there'd still be transfers, but they'd happen at wherever makes sense in the network rather than at these dedicated transfer points. And they wouldn't be mandatory. You could get on the bus and you'd have a fair chance of being able to go all the way to where you're going. But you'd probably have to walk further because there are fewer lines on the map. So that's the ridership alternative. This is the coverage alternative. So ridership, coverage, ridership, coverage. So if you look at the coverage alternative, well, it's not the same as the existing network, but it's a lot more similar to it. And of course, it can't be the same as the existing because there's going to be a BRT, and we had to adjust service to make sense in the context of that BRT. But at a higher level, you can think of a lot of the concepts that underlie this network as similar to the ones from the existing network, with perhaps a little bit more emphasis on all-day service and less peak-only service. But otherwise, you can see that it's, again, other than the BRT, mostly routes that run every 30 minutes and some routes that run every 60, particularly as you get into more outlying areas. The details of this vary from one area to another. Again, reminder that these are alternatives, not final networks, so we're not making final judgments in either alternative about just exactly how much service should be in each network. But the big picture here is that the coverage alternative is somewhat of an adaptation of the existing network to make sense in the context of there being a BRT in future. So I'm going to give you some really high-level numbers. I can show you all sorts of more data and information on what this means. But just to get through this and to get to public input, I'll give you the high-level numbers on what's going on here and then what we've heard about it. So in existing service, there's kind of two measures we look at. One is how many people are near transit, and that's a measure of coverage. And one is how many places can transit actually get you to. And we resume that measure to jobs because jobs is what we have good data on. So if you can get to more jobs, typically you can get to more places, particularly since a lot of other places people need to go, like retail, like services, like even a community center are places of employment. So we look at how many people are within a quarter mile, and how many jobs people can get to in 45 minutes or less. So in existing service, 79% of Madison residents live within a quarter mile of a bus stop with all-day service, and the average Madison resident can reach about 24,000 jobs within 45 minutes by transit. In the ridership alternative, the number of people near an all-day bus stop would go down. It would go from 79 to 67%. But the average Madison resident could access more than twice as many jobs by transit as they can now. And that is related to the higher frequency and more direct nature of the routes. So even though people have to walk farther, they only have to wait for half as long, or perhaps even less. And they are on straighter routes that don't require them to transfer necessarily at transfer points, and so they can get to more places. In the coverage alternative, the percentage of people with all-day service would go very slightly up, from 79 to 81%. The average Madison resident could still access more jobs than they can today, about just shy of 40% more jobs within 45 minutes. But it wouldn't be as dramatic of an impact as in the ridership alternative. And really, it would be largely concentrated along the BRT alignment where there would be frequent and direct service. Also, I'm not showing the maps tonight. I can show them later if you want. But in the ridership alternative, there are a few people lose out on access, but almost, way over 90% would have improved access overall. In the coverage alternative, there's a slightly more mixed picture, where certainly the majority of people see an improvement, but a few more people would see a loss. I haven't mentioned equity yet, and that's already come up in the discussion tonight. So I do want to say we did look at, in both alternatives, what the relative impacts were between the population in general versus people of color and people with low incomes. And generally speaking, the impact that an alternative will have on the general population is pretty similar to the impact that it will have on people of color or people with low incomes. In percentage terms, there's less impact for people with low incomes because people with low incomes are heavily concentrated downtown. There's a lot of students and young adults in the early stages of their career who are right downtown, and so that data tends to be very heavily weighted to that population. In terms of population of color, you can see that ridership alternative, the job access would increase by 120% in 45 minutes or less. Coverage would increase by 28%. So, roughly similar ballpark to population as a whole. And I mentioned earlier about, how we are limited by the resources that are available right now and the level of service that was in 2019. So that does leave a few things on the table that we know are left on the table, and we're not making a judgment about that. They just weren't possible at this time. So we're not significantly expanding the overall scope of the network in either alternative. We're going about as far out, into the different neighborhoods of Madison as we were previously. And evening and weekend service would remain significantly lower than weekday service, as has historically been the case. So knowing all this, we asked some questions to the public, and they really kind of come down to these three, which is, first of all, which alternative are you leaning toward? What's missing or wrong about each alternative? And also, knowing that we haven't solved the weekend and evening problem, should we be shifting resources from weekdays to weekends and evenings, even if that means less good service on weekdays? We went out and solicited input in a variety of different ways, really three main ones. One is we've had this email, metroredesign@cityofmadison.com, that's been open since the early stages of the project that people can write to really anytime. And over the course of this latest outreach process, we've heard from about 20 people on this email address. We also offered meetings, Zoom or in person, and focus groups to a variety of interested groups. And some groups also asked for them. Overall, we got 5 of them done. So not a whole lot, but a few. And probably the biggest source of input by far is this online survey that we had going. And so we got over 3,000 responses in total, which is higher than the number of responses we got in the first phase. And we really got responses from all age, income, and race groups throughout Madison. So we have an interesting source of data that is perhaps not statistically exact, but gives us a good sense of what people are more and less interested in. And we reviewed also the feedback that we got, not just in the context of the overall sample, which we know is going to be biased in certain ways by the people who managed to respond to online surveys, but also by how people identified in responding to the survey. So we asked people, what do they ride transit often? How old are they? What is their household income? What is their race? Do they have a disability? And knowing this, we were able to use the general results, but also break them down by category to get some idea of how these results vary depending on where people are coming from. And I give you the N numbers here in this slide, so you can see that we actually do have a fair number of responses in each one of these categories. The first one, frequent transit users, was actually so high that all the results I'm going to give you are going to be the same for the whole sample versus frequent transit users. They're within a couple percentage points. Then we did see a few differences of opinion depending on background based on some of these other metrics. So generally speaking, we asked people whether the ridership or coverage alternative would be better than what's there today. We asked it for them and their family, we asked it for their neighborhood, and we asked it for Madison as a whole. And so when we asked whether an alternative would be better for them and their family, well, about 60% of our respondents agreed that the ridership alternative would be better for them and their family, versus about 37% agreed for coverage. So some measure of support for both, but definitely much stronger support for the ridership alternative. And also I want to note that only 25% of people disagreed that the ridership alternative would be better for them and their family. Whereas in coverage, you can see that roughly the same number of people agreed and disagreed on this question. When we look at how this breaks down by different groups, the strongest supporters of the ridership alternative were young adults aged 18 to 35 and people with lower incomes, 35K or less, who are more or less 70% believe that the ridership alternative would be better for them and their family. The least enthusiastic, but still just about barely majority supporters of ridership were seniors age 65 and over, and people who identified as having a disability. With regards to people of color, a majority, 62%, agreed that the ridership alternative would be better with them and their family. But I also want to note that people of color were the most likely group to be supporting the coverage alternative in this not a majority, but stronger support than among other groups. So that was how we got for when people were considering themselves and their own personal needs. The responses changed a little bit when we asked people what they thought would be better for Madison as a whole. And so what we heard there is still stronger support for ridership than for coverage, but somewhat attenuated, right? More or less a 5 to 10% shift toward coverage. And when we break that down by groups, you can see a couple things. A narrow majority of disabled respondents thinking that the coverage alternative is better for Madison as a whole. And also people of color, when they think about Madison as a whole, told us that, they sort of are kind of equally fine with ridership or coverage. I don't want to say they're exactly fine with it, but there's the same level of support essentially for the two alternatives among the respondents who are people of color. Also interesting, seniors are least likely to support either alternative when they think about Madison as a whole. Roughly, 40% agree that it would be better for Madison. So that is how we heard about that. Yeah, sorry. And then we also asked people then to compare them head to head. And if they're going head to head, they had a slider that they could push one way or another, left towards ridership, right towards coverage. And if you had to choose this, where would you go? And so you can see that there were 9 possible positions. And what you're seeing here is the distribution of results that we got. And you can see that the percentages here, the total percentage on the ridership side of the equation is about 60. On the right, on the coverage side, it's about 36. And you can see that really the responses kind of tend to converge towards go most of the way toward ridership, but maybe not all of the way towards ridership. I think that's pretty consistent with what we heard when people evaluated those individually, and then again side by side. So then the other question we asked was specifically whether Metro should shift more resources to the evenings and weekends, even if that means lower service on weekdays. And a lot of people weren't sure and didn't really know what to answer, but to the extent people did know, it did tend toward a no. And I think that that's an understandable response in that, people generally don't like to see relatively low service levels replaced by even lower service levels. There were various opportunities for open-ended comment in the survey. This is an extremely brief summary of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments. I'm not going to claim this is comprehensive in any way, but what we heard there was kind of consistent with what we might expect based on the answers to the questions with specific choices. Overall, a little bit more support for the ridership alternative and the coverage alternative, with some interest in having a little bit of both in the final plan, specific interest in improving access during nights and weekends, specific interest in increasing ridership and improving access while not creating inequitable outcomes. A little bit of concern about the routes drawn in the different alternatives, causing some people who ride the bus often now to have to change what they're doing and perhaps even need to, drive a car instead of ride transit. And certainly, interest in more service, increasing overall frequency in the bus routes, and also a little bit of interest in parking options near bus stops or transfer points, particularly for people coming farther out. So with all of that, the question that we're going to be asking you tonight really is, how do we take that and turn it into a draft plan? And really what we need to know is kind of which way should we lean and how hard should we lean? And then if you have more specific comments, we can get into those as well. But what we really need to know is, should we really be leaning all the way into the ridership alternative, just making corrections in response to specific identified issues? Or should we be leaning towards ridership, but with some concessions towards, maybe we can reach a few more places if we accept lower frequency in some areas? And conversely, should we actually be leaning toward coverage, either very strongly or moderately? So that's the key question for tonight. And before I guess we go any further, I think this might be a good time to see if there's any questions or discussion that needs to take place right now.
All right, any questions for Daniel? Questions on the presentation? Badri, go ahead.
You might have missed this one. So this survey that you took mostly for the current riders, right? So this is mostly from the current riders?
This is a general public survey. It was available to anyone. I let Melissa discuss how it was advertised, but we got responses from all kinds of people. 70% of the people, 1,500 people, which is half of the respondents, told us that they were frequent riders pre-COVID. They may not be frequent riders right now, but probably some chunk of those are. 30% were not frequent riders pre-COVID. I think maybe 10% were like never riders.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering because most of it's leaning towards the ridership side because they're already current riders, so they would like to be on that side, right? So they might not be interested in the coverage side because they're already been covered.
Well, maybe, but not necessarily, because if you're an existing rider and you have this network, right? And you know how to use the route you have right now. And there are a lot of routes kind of in a lot of places that you can get to in fairly short walks, right? If you know this system well and you're a frequent rider, you could be interested in this system with higher frequencies, or you may really not be interested in it because it will make you walk twice as far. The bus doesn't end up in the same place where your current bus ends up now. Maybe you've made certain decisions in your life that work very well with the existing bus system. So I'm not sure that I would say that you would necessarily expect a current frequent rider to like the ridership better.
Okay. That's a good one. Thanks.
All right, any further questions? Alder Foster, go ahead, please.
Thanks. In terms of you've mentioned that in the ridership alternative, there's high enough frequencies that we were able to, that we don't need the transfer points, which I think is a really sort of significant difference between the two. Is there a threshold of how much towards ridership we need to maintain in order to keep that before we have to sort of reintroduce the transfer points?
I'm not sure there's an exact threshold. I think if the board chooses to lean toward ridership, either moderately or strongly, that's going to take us in a direction where we're more likely to design these through routes, and then not have transfer points, or perhaps not have all the ones that exist today. Some of the transfer points are weaker than others or have less good reasons to exist. The north transfer point in particular is so, there's really not that much farther out. It's really kind of in the way, as opposed to facilitating access to a lot of places. Story might be a little bit different for the west transfer point, or the east transfer point, for example. But I think that if the board chooses to lean in the ridership direction, that will probably that will tend to move us in a direction with fewer or none of the transfer points.
Thank you.
Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. I am wondering, in the process of evaluating, particularly the ridership alternative, whether there was any specific outreach to communities and neighborhoods in areas that would be either losing service or not gaining service, to solicit their opinion, and or whether Metro staff was able to crunch any numbers and tell us, for example, how many boardings and alightings we would be losing should we, say, drop coverage of a specific quadrant or neighborhood.
I guess, Melissa, would you mind addressing the part about outreach to various areas? And I don't know, Mike, if you have anything to add on that.
Can you guys hear me? Just checking. Yeah, great. I've been having issues. Sorry. So yeah, Margaret, we did actually, one of the biggest areas that is having a drop in, based on the alternatives, not on the plan, would be sort of the Dudgeon Monroe, Nakoma neighborhood associations. And we actually met with them twice. So right in there, thank you, Daniel. So we did meet with them twice. We also did do some outreach down in Allied Drive, which is another area of concern. I'm just looking at my notes here. And then as far as doing outreach into some of the more disadvantaged neighborhoods in general, we were at Juneteenth. We went to one of the neighborhood resource team events on the southwest side twice. So we did attempt to reach out to those folks more as a way of getting a broader input. But I do think we did hear quite a bit from the folks who were concerned about route number 19, if that helps.
Right. And that's a route that used to run down Monroe and Nakoma into the Allied neighborhood pre-COVID, but isn't currently in service.
Right. Yeah. I'll add, just to be equitable towards routes that people have requested. We also heard requests for the 14 and the 15 and the 56 and 57. But just to add on, we also met with the north side. I don't think Melissa was there for that one. I think we did independently. So they're losing some area, some on the ridership map. And then to Margaret's other question, we do have estimated boardings at bus stops for all over the city. we used that to draw the maps. We did not add up how many of those people would lose service, because that's a very complicated thing. It's like some people are, they're losing service, but the service is on a different street. There's a gray line where are you losing service, or are you just having to walk farther, or is it the same but different? And then also from a general ridership standpoint, the presumption on this whole strategy is that we would lose some of the ridership in those areas that have lost service, but that we would more make up for it by enhancing the frequency of the service on other routes. So from a total ridership perspective, that's implied by the name, the ridership map. And we have not done any ridership projections on these because that's too difficult to do. Daniel, correct me if I said anything.
Nope, I think that's all correct.
Thank you. Any additional questions? All right, seeing none. Carolyn, go ahead.
Well, since I'm new and since I can ask a question, I was wondering if it's important to consider the reliability of each of these alternatives, and whether the benefits to the ridership alternative are sensitive to the reliability of that service. So the more frequent service, if that were threatened and it really weren't as frequent as it would be planned to be, does that matter in assessing these alternatives and how they're constructed?
I guess yes, but reliability problems exist because your buses run in mixed traffic, and they run in mixed traffic now, as they always have. I think to some extent the BRT's reliability will be protected because it'll have its right of way and its facilities. On other routes, the reliability wouldn't be perfect, but I wouldn't expect it to be particularly better or worse than it is right now. Justin?
Yeah, I'm on my phone, so I apologize. But I would add in many ways, the more frequent routes are a bit more resilient because they don't rely on time transfers. In many ways, our existing system and in some ways the coverage network rely on time transfers, and so when things get delayed, the whole system kind of falls apart. And so in many ways, that I would say the ridership network is more resilient in that respect.
Right. There is an aspect of reliability that's simply what happens when your bus breaks down or doesn't show up. And if the bus comes every 15 minutes, well, you wait, a half an hour instead of 15 minutes. But if your bus comes every 30 minutes, you wait an hour instead of 30 minutes. And so that starts having bigger impacts on people's days.
All right, any additional questions? Seeing none, go ahead and continue, Daniel.
Okay. Well, I'm not, I guess I'm not sure exactly what the process is here, but we would like direction on this question.
Okay. Reva, did we have any registrants for comment that registered after the meeting started?
I have none for this item.
Okay, just checking. Thank you. All right, then I will open the floor up for discussion among board members. And then ultimately, we'll need a motion to vote on or more. Alder Foster, you're up first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree with what I saw as kind of staff recommendation, what seemed to come out of the public input, which is maybe something like 2. But I guess I just want to clarify, it's like a 2 leaning towards a 1, not a 2 leaning towards a 3. And I anticipate that as we're looking at, okay, well, maybe we could reduce a little bit of frequency here to add this other route. It's going to be really difficult to stop, okay, well, we can add a new route for coverage here. Like, does this neighborhood deserve it? Does this neighborhood deserve it? And I worry that if we yeah, if we think about, if we're not really careful, we might all agree on something like a 2, but there's this real risk, I think, of starting to slide towards a 3, which I think would not be good. So I'm going to just say, in general, I actually think just the straight up ridership model is really strong. I think the numbers are really, really impressive about access. I think it really addresses our goal of reducing VMT, which is an overarching policy goal for us on the board, both for safety, environmental, everything. Certainly open to seeing some tweaks where we could have some additional coverage if it doesn't have a significant impact on the ridership model, but I would want to be very judicious about that and really, really try and stick as close to the ridership model as possible.
All right, thank you. Badri, go ahead.
Yeah, I pretty much had similar concern there. What we are voting on, whether it is 1 or 2, or is it leaning towards 3 or 4, right? So is it when they mentioned these numbers, so it was a little bit more clarity on that one. I'm also concerned on the District 7 side of it where I live. We already have very low coverage now with the ridership model that I see. It's pretty much eliminates the whole District 7 other than one small portion there. So I just a little bit concerned there about the coverage portion of it if we are 100% going on the current ridership model.
Thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I agree. I live on the far west side, and that coverage is important. I've heard conversation about that, but I also had looked at the numbers presented in terms of the ridership and the possibility as you're going into this draft plan. If we are saying ridership, you're not abandoning the areas where frequency is going to be pulled into the model. I guess I'm not looking for a true hybrid, but absolutely looking for a ridership and then also frequency nights and weekends because people work all times, and so I'd like to have a little bit of both.
May I say something in response to the last 3 comments?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself. I was gonna actually prompt you to see if maybe you'd want to, in addition to whatever you're going to say, but also maybe give us an overview of like what are the next steps, and so people are clear that this is not, we're not making the final decision on what exactly is going to happen at the very end. That might be useful. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Which would you like me to do first?
Whatever you feel comfortable doing, whatever makes the most sense.
Okay, let me start with then the broader process so that that's clear. So we're now at the end of the second phase of public outreach. We kind of had a first phase of the project, back in the spring that was about, finding out and presenting some basic realities and trade-offs about the system and hearing from the public what the general priorities were. The second phase, we developed these, more specific, here's what this would look like on the ground alternatives, one way or another. We've asked people for their feedback. And now we want to go into the next phase, which is to draw an actual draft network plan. Say if the one future network, we think it could look like this. And then we will ask, is that correct? Or are there any particular things about this that are really wrong or missing or need to change? So what we're trying to do now is to get from a situation of, okay, we've heard what people prioritize and what's important, and people have had a chance to do that when faced with some fairly concrete realities about what that might look like. So having heard that, here's the actual proposal. The next phase is the proposal. And we'll put that out to the public. When we hear back from the public, we'll then be coming back for, okay, what do we need to do based on what we've heard to turn this proposal into the final plan, which will be ready sometime in the first half of next year, perhaps even the first quarter of next year. So that's the general higher level process. We're going from alternatives to a draft proposal. I wanted to address the point about, it's actually addressing several points, but I wanted to give a clearer notion of what this would mean to say a 2. I do think that's the direction in which the public input is leaning, not necessarily a staff recommendation. This isn't really a staff level thing. This is a values and priorities thing. It's a board level thing, but it is what the public has told us. So a 2, if that's the way that the board chooses to go, means that some of the red lines on this map turn blue. And that makes it possible to have a little bit more, a few more blue lines in some other place on this map where either there isn't coverage right now or the coverage is a little bit far away, right? That's what that would mean. And I'm not going to say specifically where it should be at this point, but you can look at the difference between these two maps, see which segments didn't get covered, and you can have an idea of where we'd go first. So that's what a 2 is. We would be starting from this map, turning some red segments blue, and then figuring out where are the places where it is most essential to maintain coverage as it exists today. So the end result in terms of outcomes would be that compared to this map, more people would be near all-day service, but then the total job access within 45 minutes, that sort of median result, would probably go down a little bit, because anytime you turn a line every 15 minutes down to every 30, that reduces how far people can get to in a certain amount of time because they have to wait places. So yeah, I think that's what I had to say in response to all those things. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful. So just to make sure, summarize, you're looking for tonight from us a high-level decision on what you have here, ridership versus coverage, and that we should be a little bit careful getting too fixated on the maps one way or another, because there will be plenty of opportunity to make changes to individual routes and things when the report comes out. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, there's going to be an opportunity right after you've answered this question to tell us about specific things that you want to make sure we're paying attention to.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. All right, continuing the discussion, are there further comments? Does anybody feel, how do people feel about this question we've been discussing? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is feasible or not, but I think it's really difficult to separate policy from implementation. And so like for us to give a policy decision on a 4-point scale that gets translated into a specific proposal that will obviously include a ton of individual and specific policy decisions, right? When you all go back then and say, okay, we got the general direction, you're still going to be having to make a bunch of individual decisions to say, okay, well, which of these 15-minute routes can we turn into a 30, and then where should we propose adding this additional coverage? And obviously that'll all be based on the data, information, judgment, et cetera. But that's like all of that process is also part of the policy decision making in my mind. So my question is, how feasible is it to come back with a proposal that also has some variance or that shows, okay, here was the original ridership model. You told us ridership, but shifted a little bit towards coverage. Here's what we came up with, and here are some kind of individual variants on that. Like we decided to reduce frequency here and put it over here. Instead of putting it over here, we could also put it over there. I mean, is that how it will be presented next time, or is it just going to be basically one option that we get to say, okay, thank you, or kind of randomly come up with questions and recommendations to change it? I guess, can you help with that?
Sure. So the short answer on the will there be multiple options within the proposal is that probably not, because when we develop a proposal, for people to be able to really react to it and know what's real and what's true and which way is up, we have to, put out concretely what we think it is. And then if, the public doesn't like it, or a large number of people don't like a particular idea, they have the opportunity to say so, and we have the opportunity to change it. But if we say it could be A, it could be C at this stage, we're really not giving the public the tools it needs to judge and, help decide whether or not this is the right plan for their neighborhood, for their community. I think you're right that it is a little bit difficult to think about this at a high level without any idea what might change. If I were to get more concrete on this, and I'm hesitant to just because, it's a process that requires kind of a lot of people thinking at the same time to say things correctly, but I think you can be fairly confident simply because of the BRT process that's ongoing at the same time that this A line, which is the east-west BRT, is going to exist and be a red line in any version of this plan. And I think that some portion of the B line, perhaps the whole B line, is going to stay red kind of no matter what. And to the extent that there's a need to turn anything that is currently red in this map into something blue to extend coverage, it's more likely to either be at the outer ends of, it's more likely to either be on the C or D or at the very outer ends of the B. But Justin, you've got something to add to that, so.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, and you kind of mentioned it there, that it doesn't mean we have to turn an entire route from red to blue. It could be segments, outer segments of a route.
I also want to say that there will be, so we're going into this design process later this week on Thursday. We're doing half days for a few days. At minimum, I believe Thursday, Friday, Monday, but we're, depending on where we're at in the process, we may continue into Tuesday, Wednesday as well. And at the end of each of those half days, there is an opportunity, I believe at 4:30 p.m. Central. Mike, I don't have my calendar in front of me. But so if you could correct me, for a check-in that's kind of at a policy level, which the board could send members to check in and verify, whether how things are going represents the deeper substance of what the board wants to tell us. Is that correct, Mike? Is it 4:30?
Yeah, 4:30 is what I have on my calendar. Yep.
So 4:30 on Thursday, Friday, and next Monday, definitely, and then possibly going into next Tuesday and Wednesday. So if the board wants to send members to any of those, you can see how the work is going as it's progressing and provide input and, see what's good and what needs to change in our next day's work.
Yeah, that sounds good. I guess where I'm going, and maybe this is just, maybe you can just share this information on whatever you end up recommending, and it's not feasible to have any kind of variations on it. But to me, the actual numbers of number of jobs reachable within 45 minutes for how many people, and actually seeing those kinds of things on the map, that to me is the best information we can have to make these decisions. And it would be really great to know, as we move away from the ridership model towards bringing in some amount of additional coverage, those are going to be incremental changes, right? You're going to move one driver from one route and create some new one, and our access to jobs is going to drop, right? That percentage number will drop, and some of those might be more impactful than others. And so it would be really, from making a policy decision perspective, I would like to see, here are the different logical increments of how we can move from pure ridership towards this option 2. And if we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drivers, here is how those numbers change. Here's what it's actually doing, rather than just what kind of feels like throwing darts in the dark. Like, okay, yeah, this looks good. A little bit more coverage, like kind of matches the survey results, but is that, like, what does that actually lead to in terms of transit access? I don't feel like I have good enough information to give a good judgment decision without that kind of info.
Right. So what we can do, we can't really get those exact, like those access measurements that I gave you about jobs within 45 minutes. That's like a 2-week back end process. Like we can't change those live and direct as we're drawing lines on a map in a meeting. We might be able to figure out the total number of people and jobs near a certain network, although even that's a little sketchy in the moment. But we are still not operating totally in the dark, right? When we draw these maps, we're not just drawing them on a blank background like you see here. We have all the demographic data at the block group level that the census and LEHD make available. And we have on hand Metro Transit's team, and as is needed, the City of Madison's planning team to tell us about how those data do and don't differ from actual reality on the ground. So we would make decisions, I think, that would try to preserve the access as much as possible. Anytime when we would make a decision, for example, that maybe over here we don't need the service quite as frequent, and over here we'd like to add coverage, we wouldn't be making those in a void. We'd be making them in the context of, fewer people would be impacted here, more people would get a benefit there. And we think, and we have a sense of the scale of the benefit just based on, where key destinations are and how far away that people are from them.
Yeah, so maybe if there are ways to preserve some of that even narrative explanation, even if it can't be, hard numbers behind it, would be really helpful to understand the thinking that went into it and to be able to share with the public, right? This is the reason we ended up with this is we went through all of this and here's what we were evaluating as we were doing it. And this is why we made the decisions we did. I think that would be really useful as opposed to just saying, well, you all said 2 out of 9 or 2 out of 4. And so here's the best version of that, trust us, right? I think it's going to be difficult because then we're just, I think, going to get in a situation where every neighborhood and every resident is going to advocate for, but I'm missing my line. And then it's just squeaky wheel time, right? And like, who can get the most people to show up and say, we demand our neighborhood line back. Enough people show up, then we say, okay, we pull another line over that way. And I don't want to do that, right? I would like us to try and have something very defensible and that we can actually look at what's the greatest benefit for the city, what's the greatest benefit for neighborhoods that are under-resourced currently, et cetera. So I guess just think about that and make sure we have good information to share that really justifies whatever you come back with.
Yeah. Couple things I wanted to add in response to that. One is the truth is that any single decision, to move from the ridership to something with a little bit more coverage is obviously going to be really difficult. It won't be taken lightly, and because they're all going to have impacts. And having not gone through the exercise yet, I don't know that I'm convinced that there are that many places we can do it. There may not be, a menu from 1 to 5 of, how we can turn this up and down. There may be like at best a 1, 2 or a 1, 2, 3. As regards the point of, later on in the process when people are discussing their individual routes and how they want them back or how, various things like that, I would argue that, yeah, we do need to give you, the project team as a whole needs to give you the best possible information, and we'll certainly endeavor in that direction. But there's also responsibility that then comes on the board as policymaker and on you all as policymakers to, the distinction between responding to your constituents who want specific things for valid reasons, and your responsibility to, ensuring that the broader plan has benefits for the whole community. And so that's always a tension, and you should definitely expect to hear from a whole lot of people when a draft plan is out there. Many of them won't be happy. And you should record the reasons why, and then see the degree to which that, does that constitute a systemic problem, or does that constitute local problems that, can be fixed with adjustments?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. General, I remember earlier in your presentation, you talked about the trade-offs. And so what I hear again, there will be trade-offs, but as Alder Foster said, is that as we're making these trade-offs to have some strong data points in terms of why the trade-offs, because we're not going to make everybody happy. And so those are the things that as being a policymaker is that why the decision was made. And so looking at those trade-offs. I wanted to ask you a question. You kind of mentioned transfer points, and does that play? Are we looking at that, or how is that implementing the design at all? Or you just mentioned it? I just want to follow up and ask you a question about transfer point.
Great, thank you. Let me address the transfer point thing directly to make sure there's no confusion in anyone's mind. What they are, what they do, what they could be. So your existing system, which is a fairly coveragey system by the way, relies on routes that kind of run mostly in inner Madison. Like you can take this 7, for example, go downtown, go out the other end, they start and end at a transfer point. And what these transfer points do is that if you live in an outlying part of Madison, you have a route near you, kind of in most locations, and that route takes you to the transfer point where you have a timed transfer, so usually a 5 to 10 minute wait for any other route that goes through there. And so that has some advantages and some inconveniences. The advantage is that if you're running, low frequency service, having a timed transfer means that you won't have to wait a very long time a second time. You'll have to wait, but it'll be shorter. The disadvantage is that there's very few places you can get to directly. And there's a lot of logical paths where you just put in a 5 or 10 minute wait for people who might otherwise be moving. And that can be very frustrating as a rider. So that's what the transfer points are. There are 4 main ones right now. There's the west one that serves the southwest, south, which is far south, east, which serves the whole east and southeast, north, which serves a little bit of north here. And there's a 5th kind of transfer point at the East Town Mall. So that's how that works now. In the ridership alternative, the basic logic of the system, actually, I should start with the coverage alternative. In the coverage alternative, the basic logic of the system is the same. The details of what route is what number change a little bit, but generally it's the same idea. In the ridership alternative, what's changed is that we're trying to get as many people as possible on direct paths to wherever they're going. And so we're taking routes that are going from kind of the far end of the outlying areas at one end of Madison, going all the way into town and out the other direction to the peripheral areas on the other side, so that people don't need to transfer as often. And however, you're never going to get everything on your one route. So there's still opportunities to transfer at various places if you're not, for example, heading downtown, which is just the biggest destination, but by no means the only one. But what we're doing is we're relying more on the frequency instead of the timing of the transfers. If your bus comes every 15 or at worst every 30, you're not likely to be waiting twice an hour for a bus. So we can rely on that instead of having the transfer points. So that's kind of that's how that's different in the ridership alternative. And I think if we go with the draft plan proposal that is more leaning in the direction of the ridership alternative, we're probably going to continue leaning more in that direction of trying to enable frequent to frequent transfers rather than time transfers at the outlying transfer points.
All right, thank you. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say pretty quickly that I appreciate this discussion and I like the sounds of, I think, where we're headed. So it seems clear that we should be leaning towards the ridership option in the 1 or 2 range. And then just in terms of figuring out where the opportunities are to ramp up that coverage, I would also love if we could see the numbers, how the numbers play out. And since we can't, I just think we should, look for those opportunities to improve coverage in those key areas. and make that be the justification for doing that. And if those opportunities really don't jump out, then I think be prepared to just lean more towards the high ridership option and explain how we landed there. So thanks.
Thank you. Badri, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up one more point. We had so much discussion on West Transfer Point with the BRT to bring that route down to the West Transfer Point and going back to Mineral Point and all of that, right? So if we take out the transfer point, so it's going to actually impact a lot all the decisions we were making on that side of it too. Just wanted to bring that one up.
So that's a really excellent point. When we drew this ridership alternative, we were trying really hard to not have to bring the BRT down to West Transfer Point, because that's making the line longer. It's adding to the number of buses and drivers you need on the route. And it's taking all the people that are on the bus that are riding through out of their way for a few minutes every time the bus runs. So there's really good reasons on a BRT, if you can avoid it, not to make those kinds of deviations. And so that's why in the ridership alternative, you don't see the West Transfer Point and you see the BRT straight on Mineral Point and then up, going towards town. So that's how that went. If West Transfer Point is maintained, yes, the BRT would have no choice, as in this coverage alternative, to dip down and come back up, because otherwise you're just missing too many people, too many opportunities to connect.
Yeah, that was the coverage is what was the main target at that time too, with the West Transfer Point. Now, if that is taken out, the coverage is gone. Yes, from the west side of the town.
Thank you, Alder or Mike. Did you want to respond to Audrey's?
Sure, I just want a little bit to add that, since Jarrett Walker and associates are not as directly linked to the BRT system as we are. So we when we were putting the BRT system together, we wanted to maintain the option of serving the West Transfer Point if we had to. We did not want to. I want to be clear that we didn't want to make the decision to get rid of the West Transfer Point with the BRT project and then have Jarrett Walker have no option but to deal with that outcome. We instead wanted to have that outcome be have that decision be an outcome of this specific process. So I think the presence of the West Transfer Point is going to be a factor of how many routes go in there and need to serve BRT. I suspect that this decision being made today will fairly directly imply whether the West Transfer Point exists. Anywhere towards the the 1 or 2 end of the ridership spectrum would likely imply that it would not exist, and that the BRT line would go straight from Whitney Way to Mineral Point.
Thank you, Mike. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to add one more consideration, kind of from a policy perspective around the transfer point. So obviously, they kind of make sense in one model, maybe not needed in the other. Having the East Transfer Point in my district and having received a lot of the reports of different issues that have gone on there that go on there over time, and having heard very similar things for the North Transfer Point, the South Transfer Point, I've heard from a lot of people that they feel very unsafe at the transfer points themselves. That's an issue that we can deal with separately, and if it makes sense to have them as part of the network design, then we'll have them. But I will tell you that it plays into part of my desire to move towards a system where they're not needed, because I do think they bring some other potential negatives to folks using the system, and it's another group of considerations that we need to think about, and with including obviously the cost of just owning and maintaining the properties and the facilities themselves. But for me, it's a real consideration. So I just wanted to mention it at this phase as well.
Thank you. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out too that one thing that we can't lose sight of is those transfer points were built 25 years ago, and they are nearing the end of their life. And so this is not a cost neutral decision either. If we do decide to move more in the coverage direction and keep transfer points, we will probably need to, plan for a multi-million-dollar renovation of those facilities probably within 5 years or so.
I'd like to add
you,
a
Bruce.
point also that's specific to East Transfer Point. As we worked on the alternatives last time, you might notice if you look in East Madison on the ridership alternative that there sure seems to be something that could be an East Transfer Point around the new roundabout where the new Pinney Public Library is. And I'm not saying that's definitely going to be an outcome of the draft plan, but regardless of which way we go, there seemed to be decent reasons for routes to converge in that area. And so one outcome might be that maybe you don't have all the transfer points, but maybe one or two of them remain, and maybe they're not in the same place, depending on what makes the most sense.
I could just respond real quick. I think that, would partly even address what I was raising. I think there's a really significant difference if there's an effective transfer point at a library or even on just a major corridor that's full with people versus on a empty lot on the wrong side of a busy street that's very isolated. So yeah, there are definitely ways to make a transfer point better in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to interject a couple of cautions, historical notes, and the generally contrarian point of view for the moment. Just having been around for a long time and having long enough to have watched and participated in the debate about the transfer point system development, et cetera. Yeah, the transfer points as designed are problematic. They were designed, frankly, to be problematic because the community at the time could have chosen to integrate those transfer points into the urban landscape. But the voices that carried the day said, no, we want to keep, quote unquote, those people, those bus riders, away from us. And hence they ended up in isolated places with no services, no ancillary services offered. That was not, at the time, that was not the first plan that Metro put forward. Second, I just want to point out a limitation to all of this data, which is, and Daniel, I'm going to pick on you just for a second. I'm not really picking on you, but I'm just going to highlight something you said about these routes getting you anywhere you want to go. You used data on employment, and I understand why you used employment data. I understand that it's the better data set. I also understand that jobs are important and accessibility of jobs are important. But those are not the only places that people go. Even though our past ridership surveys do show that, getting to work or school is the dominant reason at that time that people were riding buses, but it was not the only reason. People do also take buses to get to shopping, to get to recreational activities, to get to cultural activities, to get to other family members, etc. And so when we're looking at this map, I would like this committee to keep in mind that that's what they're looking at. They're looking at residences versus residences for employment. Granted, there's overlap. State Street is both employment and it's entertainment, for example. But this really specifies employment, and that's problematic. And then also to make sure that everybody knows exactly how old I am, I just want to point out that when when I first started watching the predecessor to this committee, the access to the metro system from residences was so much greater. It was north of 90% of our residences in Madison were within a quarter mile of a bus route. Now we're down in the 70s. And that is not, let's face it, that in large part has to do with factors like sprawl development on our outskirts and decisions made by planning commission and also the planning commissions and developers who built in other communities as well. So not completely on those of us who have been interested in transportation structure, but for those of you who are elected officials, I just want to point that out because and to me, if you're planning a subdivision, say out in the Reiner Road area, which is happening. To me, building subdivisions like that without the opportunity and the funding to serve them with transit is as bad as letting subdivisions be built without access to sewage and water. Okay, transportation is a fundamental human need, and we're not planning for it in this system. So, my Debbie Downer conclusion on these maps is that unfortunately, we're not choosing maybe this is maybe these things will end up being an improvement for certain routes, for certain people, for certain areas of the city. But to me, we're also, because we're frozen into the zero additional resources model, we're basically choosing between two systems that are less bad. And I don't say that to denigrate anybody's work here. I understand that the whole exercise was and needed to be constrained, and that the money is absolutely a constraint. But for those of you who are elected officials who have some control over our budgets, I would encourage you to consider that and consider the proportion of our resources that are going to roads, et cetera, other priorities versus transit. And obviously that's not completely on the city of Madison, which has traditionally, devoted a large share of its budget to supporting mass transit. It's just highlighting the larger problem of a gradually decaying system, which is disheartening to me. That's it. That's my commentary.
Thank you. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just not that I disagree with anything you said, but just wanted to point out that the way we've measured access to bus service is different in the past than the way Jared Walker's staff measured it. Normally, the way or the MPO measured it was we essentially drew a quarter-mile circle around any bus stop with regular service, including commuter service, and said if you're within that quarter-mile boundary, you would cover. The way Jarrett Walker's staff have measured it, they're only counting midday service, I believe, and then they're also, I believe, saying you have to be within a quarter-mile walking distance along streets. or sidewalk networks. Is that true, Daniel?
Yeah, that's correct. When we say a quarter mile, we mean a quarter mile along some, known defined path, and that's mostly streets. But, the background data set includes a few paths through parks and things like that. It's, by no means a perfect representation of the walking environment, but it's much narrower than the traditional draw a quarter mile circle. So some of that difference may come from there. And yes, we were looking, when the numbers I gave in this presentation are about all day service throughout the day, including the midday. If you added peak only service, it would make a little difference in the existing and in the coverage networks. And actually in the ridership network that we drew, we did include, and they're very faint because that is how people experience them in real life, but we did include several peak only routes through the gaps in all day service, so that there would be a minimum level of service in almost the same number of places that have it right now. But yeah, both those things about measurement that Mike mentioned are true. And I also want to say that yeah, this exercise, the resource constraints in this exercise by no means represent a judgment on how much service there should be from either city staff's part, and certainly not from the consultant's part. I would agree that in Madison, as in many other places in this country, there isn't nearly enough transit service. And if there were more, the trade-offs wouldn't be as stark.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that for a second. I mean, nobody would spend as much of their life sitting on these committees as we do if we were not interested in improving all types of transportation networks for our communities. So I guess I'm speaking more to the folks who have more power than we do on this. And one last request, I don't know that this has really been fully laid out, and I know I've raised this point before, but I really would like to know, I know that currently we don't consider peak only routes when we're drawing the boundaries for ADA service, ADA mandated service, and paratransit service. So I would like to see some evaluation of how those boundaries change based on these various scenarios. In part because I'm concerned about places where we may have concentrations of people who are using those services under the auspices of Metro who would be cut out of them.
So we have not done that analysis per se. However, I'm going to say two things. One is that both the ridership and the coverage alternatives do hit a few places on the very edges that are a little farther out than service right now. And so they both probably imply a slight expansion, particularly possibly in the southwest. Whoops, sorry. Possibly in the southwest, and I'm forgetting, I think like there's one other location, but the real issue if we go with the ridership alternative or something that is based on the ridership alternative is whether we have donut holes in the middle of the ADA service area. And I don't know whether there are because we haven't drawn that map, but I can say that there is on some level a discretionary decision to be made by the city and by Metro Transit about whether to continue serving those donut holes, even though they're 0.9 instead of 0.7 miles from a bus route. And I will also say that technically, or not technically speaking, but from a cost perspective, and this is on average, not speaking to any specific trip, it's a lot cheaper to serve filling in donut holes than it is to expand areas on the outside because you're still running through them sometimes. So
yeah, and
the decision on the network doesn't have to imply the decision on the ADA area. It does imply the statutory ADA area would change, but the city does have some discretion over whether to serve anything more than the statutory area.
Absolutely. And the transportation committee and the planning board have some influence over that. And there's no reason, pre-ADA, we had a service that was better than what ADA eventually pushed us into. And there's no reason why. I also saw those donut holes, and there's no reason why we couldn't make some decisions to be more expansive and make sure those areas and some of the outskirts are covered. And I do see places also, by the way, of this sort of Cottage Grove area where we would have some additional service areas that need it. So thank you for that, raising that point.
All right, thank you. Carolyn, go ahead.
Thank you. Since Margaret has drawn attention to ADA, and I wanted to maybe follow up on one of the slides, Daniel, about residents with disabilities and their responses to the survey. And I think that in those responses, people were leaning a little bit more toward a 3 or somewhat more coverage. It wasn't, it was sort of down the middle. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right. So I think I presented that in kind of 2 different slides. So I think of the people we heard of who identified as having a disability, right? You can interpret that however you want. And it may not correspond exactly to like eligible for ADA or whatever, but it's the best data we have. About half of them agreed that the ridership alternative was better for them and their family than what's there now, and about a third disagreed. And actually, give me a second, and I'll dig you up the numbers, what they said about coverage. Okay, so ridership alternative is better for my neighborhood among persons with disabilities. It's 52 to 34 whether ridership alternative is better for them and their family. And for coverage, it's 43 to 38. So for them personally, we're still seeing a slight inclination towards the ridership alternative, or a slightly higher inclination. And then on the question about whether it's better for the whole Madison area as a whole, what you have is, so if ridership alternative is better for the Madison area, I have 48% agree, 29% disagree among persons with disabilities. So more people agree than disagree, but not a majority. And then in coverage, I have 50 agree, 23% disagree on the question, the coverage alternative is better for the Madison area. So I would say that if you consider just the responses from people who identified as having a disability, then they're much more equivocal compared to the population as a whole, and really most other groups. And that's, I think, something that is normal and expected when comparing these kinds of trade-offs, because people with disabilities are a lot more likely to feel the impacts of things like longer walks than the average member of the public.
Mm-hmm. So if there's a point where I lean, whenever the 3 pops up in my head, it's with that consideration. So for next steps and thinking about draft plan, the question I would have is what service remains, what service exists, and how to continue to provide vital service for residents. But we can't have everything, but I think that would be worth designing around.
Well, I guess you have to make a decision about whether or not you consider that ADA paratransit adequately meets the needs of disabled people, right? So people who aren't able to use transit are eligible for ADA paratransit, where, they call in and they get a point-to-point ride, and there's various restrictions, and it's not perfect, but it's there, and it does avoid the whole walk thing if that's what's needed. And so if you decide that can be structured in a way to be adequate, then you perhaps are, I guess if you decide that that's not adequate or not quite sufficient, you're a lot more likely to lean in the coverage direction. And if you decide that it is adequate, you're probably more likely to lean in the ridership direction.
That's helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify on that last point, it looked like you actually lumped together people with disabilities and those over 65 in the way you reported your results. So I just want to clarify that it's not just people with disabilities.
Here are the tables. So we looked at them separately, right? And I'm sorry, this is tiny and hard to see, but I just want to reassure you that when we grouped them, it's just because we got the same story on one question from two different groups. But we did look at seniors and people with disabilities separately. We have separate results for all these different groups. So to the extent they're grouped, it's just to make the information fit in the slide.
Yeah, it was grouped together in the presentation you just made to us.
Correct.
So, yes. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions, discussion? Seeing none, we do at some point before we move on to the next item need to pick a number, and I don't know if it needs to be an integer number. It could be a 1.5 or a 2.5 or a 3.5. Or we would need to push it off to another time. I don't know if that works, but Alder Foster, go ahead.
I will move that we give direction to the project team to approach this from a 2 leaning towards a 1 perspective.
There is a motion. Is there a second? Like Alder Furman, is that correct?
Sorry,
Alder
yes,
Furman.
I would like to second that.
Thank you, Alder Furman. There's a motion and a second. Alder Foster, would you like to speak to your motion?
I think I spoke enough already. Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of, if I'm get this right, Alder Foster, a ridership mostly leaning in towards a ridership 1 a little bit. Is that correct? All those in favor of that being the recommendation at this point, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that is, we'll vote on as unanimous. Thank you all. All right, our next item then is Legistar 67082, amending section 33.554 of the Madison General Ordinances to remove the option for an alder to serve as an officer of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so this particular item was not necessarily prompted by the Transportation Department. It's something that's been Alder initiated. I don't, you know, this with this meeting, we are trying to put together recommendations for specific items on initiatives, but this particular one is more a matter of governance. And I think Alder McKinney, sponsor of one, and maybe Alder Foster, there's been some discussion between the two. And so I don't have very much.
Okay. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I put this amendment forward after the discovery that no alder on any other board, committee, or commission can serve in the position of being chair or co-chair. And to make that consistent across all the governance, I discovered that the Transportation Committee was the only one that had an alder in in that position, being a vice chair. It is absolutely nothing against the Alder Foster, but I wanted to be very consistent across all of the boards, committees, and commission. Let me just repeat, there is no other board, committee, or commission that allows an alder to serve as a chair or a vice chair. And I discovered that personally, and I was told by the mayor and the mayor's staff that no alder can serve in those positions, only to find when I landed on the transportation boards that was not true. The second thing is that as alders, we already carry a great deal of power, and I'm going to say power, maybe I should say influence. And we are in the process of developing communities and also residents to sit on the boards, committees, and commissions. And I would like to see that relegated to residents to be able to be in that leadership position. Alders already are in an elected position. They're already in leadership. They're already making decisions in terms of policy. And I think that we should leave the opportunity for residents and lay people to serve in those positions. And so that's why I put it forward. If it is under consideration, it's not saying that Alder Foster would be removed. He would fill out his term, but following that, no alder would be able to serve as chair or co-chair. And what I've even noticed is that since I've been on the transportation boards, there has been such a wealth of technical acuity in the boards, committees, and commissions. And I would really like to see us begin to elevate the residents in those positions. And so I move acceptance of that amendment.
Okay, so there's a motion. There needs to be a second. Then we can discuss it. Margaret Bergamy. Second.
Yes, I'll second
Okay,
that.
thank you. Thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney, did you want to speak further to your motion or?
No, I'm that's
okay.
I'm complete.
Thank you. Just a point of process. Alder Foster, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It would kind of be ideal if there were a staff person that could give a little broader background on this, but I guess I'll try and fill in. So, and even the way, especially for some of the newer members, the way things are presented in Legistar can be a little bit confusing. So, Alder Harrington McKinney has a draft ordinance change that would remove the exception that allows an alder to serve as chair or vice chair of a subunit that has residents on it. I have an alternate version that I put forward that would be version 2 that's in Legistar. So I know that sometimes that's confusing for folks. So if you want to if you haven't already, to make sure you can see the kind of specific language of both of those. My alternate is actually goes the other way. So right now, again, in general, alders cannot serve as chair or vice chair. Mine also gets consistency, but it actually allows alders to serve as chair or vice chair on any board, committee, commission, rather than just on the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. And it also does a couple other things, which come out of my investigation into why this ordinance existed, why this prohibition of an alder serving as chair or vice chair is on the books at all. And I was able to speak with 2 former alders that were sponsors of that original change in our ordinances, which I think it was about like 12 or 14 years ago where that change happened. So before that, alders were able to serve as chair or vice chair if they were elected by a committee. But essentially there was a specific alder who a number of people felt were abusing their position as chair of one of the city committees. And the way that they dealt with that was to basically prohibit any alder from serving. When I spoke with these both of these alders about the circumstances and really how that alder was abusing their position of chair, what it really came down to is that they were basically kind of threatening and not allowing items to come onto the agenda to be reviewed by the body at all. So generally, like under Robert's rules, a chair doesn't really have authority to go against the will of the body. The chair can make some decisions, they can call on people, but the body itself can always overrule the chair. The one exception is really related to agenda control. So like in Robert's rules, any member of the body could say, hey, I want to talk about this thing today. But because of open meeting laws, if something's not on the agenda, we can't talk about it. And in our ordinances, we give the sole responsibility for setting the agenda to the chair. So one way that a chair can abuse their power is by not allowing an item to be on the agenda. Therefore, the committee can never discuss it, and you can hold some control over whatever that item is. I've actually witnessed that personally, and it has happened from a chair that was a resident appointee, not an alder. And so what I've done with this alternate is to really focus on that issue, on the potential for any individual serving as chair to abuse their position. And so in addition to taking away the prohibition for alders serving as chair or vice chair, I've added two other elements to our ordinances, or I'm proposing adding two other elements. One is that a committee, anybody on a committee can propose to have something on a future agenda. So any member of a body has that at the end of any meeting can say, hey, I want to have this item on the agenda at our next meeting. And if that gets a second, and if the committee votes and says, yep, we agree that should be on our next agenda, then it has to be on there. The chair doesn't have the discretion to basically withhold something or keep something off the agenda. And the second thing I've done is to really just clarify the ability of the body to recall or get rid of an officer if they want to, which all committees already have that authority per state statute, but it wasn't very obvious and clear in our ordinances. So this clarifies that. And it also increases the frequency of officer elections for all subunits so that they happen every year, so that it's less likely that a sort of rogue individual, again, whether they're a resident member or an alder member who's serving as an officer, that things just kind of roll on. We don't have elections, and everybody wishes we had a different chair. You don't like them, but there's no good way to get them out of that position. So that's the essence of the alternate that is in here, which clearly I'm sponsoring it. That's what I would support. So I would encourage you to support that rather than removing the ability for alders to serve as chair and vice chair on the TPPB.
All right, thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Oh, I
Your
didn't
hand was
realize.
up.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize my hand is up. What is in the order now? So we're in discussion, or so just clarify.
So there's been a motion to recommend approval of the ordinance that you sponsored, and there's been a second. So that's what's on the floor at the moment.
Okay, and so that needs to be carried out before the consideration of the alternate.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
thank
you could withdraw it.
No, I will not withdraw it. And I've spoken to that, and so we're at a point. Where are we in this?
So we're into discussion. So there's been a motion and a second. We are discussing.
Okay.
People are giving their opinion.
Okay. Good.
All right. So Badri, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Were you finished?
Yeah. So just as a follow-up, and I really honor Alder Foster and his commitment to having alders serve as chair or vice chair. We are in the process of looking at, there's over 100 boards, committees, and commissions, and we are in the process of looking at what works and what does not work. And when you're changing an ordinance, it is a change that goes across. I mean, an amendment you can adjust, but an ordinance is a change that goes forward. There is no guarantee at some point in time whether we would have an alder who would abuse those privileges. That is not the case. The case is that we have 102 boards, committees, and commissions. There is no alder that serves as chair or vice chair, and to make it where any alder can serve as chair, as vice chair, puts us in a position that I said that we should not be in. And especially if we are looking to increase the participation of residents in our boards, committees, and commissions. I'm complete.
Thank you, Alder. Badri, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying this one. A little bit confusing to me. I thought the chairmans actually can't even vote in most of the places. So I never saw Tom actually voting anything. It's more work for you than actually doing any influence. So I never thought you guys are influencing anything, but it's good, more clarity on that one, on the history and all of that. So second one, I just wanted to clarify on something else. There is more work is done at the different boards right now on adding or removing chairs. Is that what I'm understanding? This is only one step. There is other items presented.
So the motion that's before us right now would just remove the ability of an alder to serve as the chair or vice chair of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. This is the only body or board, committee, or commission in which where residents also serve. I think there are some alder only ones where residents also serve, that an alder can serve in that role. So this would simply remove that. Alder Foster as an alternative ordinance change that would kind of go a little bit in the other direction, where it would allow alders to serve as chairs and vice chairs, but also add a number of restrictions that could potentially rein in sort of a rogue chair, as he described it.
Okay, that's
that makes sense.
I was, when you guys were talking about, there are two different things that are presented. I thought it was one thing is going outside of this group that's looking at overarching things. So that's why I was a little confused. So
the reason it's
right
here
here
because it affects us. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. I'll let Alder Furman go next.
Thank you, Chair. I want to be clear that I will likely support, not necessarily in this venue, but Alder Foster's other version. I think for this particular body to give their opinion on that is probably indifferent. I think as far as the original motion that's in front of us, Alder McKinney did bring this up when we had our elections this year, and this board did decide to appoint Alder Foster to vice chair. I think there are benefits to that. I think being chair is an incredibly difficult job. I think there's an incredible amount of facilitation involved, and I think there are benefits to have alders either as chair or vice chair. From a policy perspective, though, I think tonight, at least as far as my opinion is, we as a board can and should weigh in on whether or not we believe the ordinance should be changed at this time in relation to Transportation Policy Planning Board. And obviously, as Alder Foster and Alder McKinney has pointed out, there are other efforts going on to actually look at the committee system and how that works and how we can streamline that, as well as rules associated with that, et cetera. So I won't be supporting the change to Transportation Policy Planning Board, but I am eager to have those further discussions at other venues, but do think obviously tonight is an opportunity for Transportation Policy Planning Board to again, just point their preference. I also do, as I'm speaking, just want to apologize. I cannot get my camera to work, so I'm sorry for the black screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. I think that clarification was very helpful. It certainly was to me as well. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of points. First, in a way, I'd like to see an amalgam of these two proposals because I do support Alder Foster's suggestion that there be a formal way for committees and commissions to basically order that something appear on the next agenda. That does get into complications, though sometimes having served as vice chair of the Transportation Committee, I know that there have been times that we've expected something to show up on the next agenda, and then for reasons of resources or information gathering or just timing, have decided not to put it on the next agenda, but on a subsequent agenda. And I have to say that everybody I have worked with on the various transportation boards have acted in good faith with this. I've personally not witnessed chairs abusing their power. And in terms of capacity building, I think that restricting the chair and vice chair to being non-alders does actually build the capacity, or provides opportunities to build capacity among our citizenry. And alders do get a second bite at most of these, most anything that comes up in front of us. So frankly, I seconded this for purposes of discussion. I have an open mind on how I feel about having alders serve as officers of a committee. I also just want, somebody said that we do not appoint chairs and vice chairs on an annual basis, and I do not think that is correct. I think that we have traditionally voted on that every July. And Tom, you could perhaps correct me on that if I am wrong.
I think it's been every other year.
Okay. Okay, we used to do it every year, but yes, rules change, practices change.
If I'm not, and I think Alder Foster's probably reviewed the ordinance more recently than I have, but I think it specifies at least every other year. We've just sort of chosen to do it that way. I think it's come up in discussion on an annual basis. It was just sort of, there was not any movement towards making it be annual.
Yeah, and this is Ann Kovich might also remember this point. I think having annual elections is a good idea.
Go ahead, Ann, if you wanted to respond.
There I am, thanks. My understanding is the ordinance requires at least every other year, but at the Transportation Commission and others, we have typically done it every year just to give people the opportunity that Alder Foster is saying we should do going forward, because it's just a good idea to revisit it annually. But Margaret, I don't think it's required every year. Thanks.
Thank you, Ann. If I remember correctly, in 2020, we had, I think there was another reason why we didn't. I can't exactly remember why. There were some members that were not there at the time and were hoping to fill some roles. Regardless, well, that too. But in any case, Alder Foster, you're up next.
Thanks. I wanted to actually move a substitute motion for the alternate that I spoke to earlier. You're muted, Chair.
Hold on. Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second? Chris, I see your hand up, but I think it was for discussion.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Alder Foster, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yeah, real briefly. And I mean, I think I agree with Alder Furman also. Like in some ways, you all don't need to necessarily weigh in on the overall kind of big picture recommendation. But rather than having a choice to say, do you want to take away the ability for an alder to serve as chair or vice chair of TPPB? This alternate would basically continue to allow alders to serve as an officer with those other preconditions that I mentioned, the more regular elections and the ability for any member to have an item on the agenda. So I think you can all consider the two options just specifically related to TPPB and make your recommendation. But I hope you support the alternate version, which again would allow an alder to serve as officer on any subunit and would also require elections at least annually and would allow any member of a subunit to ask for items to be on a subsequent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. I appreciate Alder Furman's clarification. I've been aware of the peculiarity of our situation for a while and checked the ordinance myself to make sure that everything seemed fine. And I don't know how those decisions are made, but it seems to be laid out pretty clearly. So I don't know that I have a strong opinion about what the ordinance should say. On the one hand, I don't see any reason that TPPB should be different from any other body. I don't think it stands out in any way. On the other hand, I do appreciate that folks are willing to step up and serve as chair and co-chair because it does take a lot of work. And we did elect Alder Foster for the position. So personally, I think I probably do support the alternate that Alder Foster proposed, but I don't feel like I'm probably going to make any recommendation here in this body for that. I think that it's just it feels like not our place. So that's where I'm leaning right now.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead, Badri.
I was gonna just second what Chris was saying there. I thought too, I like everybody here, right? So I just don't know. It's really tough. We are all been working here for so long. So either way, it's fine. That's why I think it's not within this team to decide who's going to be. I think it's going to be a different team. Higher up probably should be doing this one first. That's why I agree with Chris that it's really, I wouldn't be able to vote on anything on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Badri. Alderman McKinney, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is my second time speaking. What's interesting, and now that I'm looking at it, it really it is a broader conversation when you're talking about any alder can serve on any of the boards, committees, or commissions. That's a huge and heavy lift, especially when we're really looking at TFOGs and how our government is functioning. But what really caught my attention is number one, Alder Foster was elected as vice chair, and so that does not impact his position at all. Let me be very clear. And Attorney Haas was very clear on that. It's just, it does not impact Alder Foster's ability to serve as vice chair. It doesn't change that. But what I did hear that really piqued my attention was the opportunity to build resident capacity. And that really stuck out on me. It doesn't, and that just erased everything that I was thinking in terms of having someone who would abuse that power. What was strong to me and that I heard is that the opportunity to build resident capacity. We have invested or will be investing a lot of money in terms of an Office of Community Engagement. It is very clear that we want more residents to be serving on these boards, committees, and commissions. And when we are putting a resident up against an elected official, and I'm wondering how that would play out. I'm even stronger committed to this amendment change when I hear the opportunity to build resident capacity. That is huge. For residents begin to step in and step into those roles and to have a system in place where they are growing and strengthening in those roles, and there's training in those roles. And so that is something that I heard tonight that I really never really thought of, but that's why this amendment is going through. It does challenge the opportunity of residents to build that capacity. And I would ask that you support or support the amendment, or not support either one of them, but to really consider that.
Thank you, Alder Furman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I actually want to respond to something Alder McKinney said is we're not really sure how it would play out if alders were able to be chair. Actually, we do have an example. That doesn't mean it would play out the same way in every board, but clearly Transportation Policy Planning Board decided to make Tom the chair, a resident, and an alder or vice chair. So we have one example of how it might possibly play out. I'm absolutely a huge fan of building capacity. Unfortunately, as a city, we are not doing a great job of building capacity. There is very little, if any, training for chairs, et cetera. And I know I'll be working with Alder Foster and Alder McKinney on trying to improve that because we desperately need to set up chairs for success, as well as far as I'm concerned, build a bench for people who might want to be alders in the future, because it's certainly a brutal job that I don't think people want to be for very long. And so if we could build capacity through committees, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Another reminder I just wanted to tell people is you really need to think about what the role is committees in our system. The role of committees in our system is to be a recommendation body to the council. And so ultimately, whatever we can do to make those recommendations useful, we should be doing. And I think one of that is to be strongly considering allowing alders to be chair. I think the last thing I will say is, there's a lot of things in front of us tonight. So hopefully at some point soon we move on, but because there's a substitute motion on the table, and because it's some people that's may not want to make a decision on this, or even Alder McKinney's, my opinion is if you vote no, and we vote no on everything, that would come across. Well, actually, maybe that'd be a good point of clarification. I think if we vote no, we can probably make no decision, but that might be wrong. We may want to decide as a committee not to make a decision. So maybe if we dispense of Alder Foster's, we can go back to another substitute of no recommendation and let this issue be argued at in other venues. But just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, could we not move to table this item without, I don't know if I can do that with the alternate on the floor right now, but frankly, given all this discussion, I would want to table both for all three proposals.
Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, just to tabling just takes it off and then we have to take it back up again, referring it to ourselves at a future meeting is just going to bring it back to ourselves. So if the goal is to not provide a recommendation, then I think what Alder Furman suggested is you could vote no on the motion to recommend the alternate, and then someone could move that a recommendation of no recommendation and vote on that. And then it would, if the goal is to be done with it and to not make a decision, that would be the right procedural way to do it.
Thank you.
That sounds right to me. Thank you. All right, any further discussion? All right, so there's a motion, there's an alternate motion. We'll vote on the alternate motion first. On the alternate motion from Alder Foster to recommend adoption of his proposal. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
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 The chair believes it's 1 aye and 7 noes. Okay, no calls for roll call. Then that will go down as 1 aye and 7 noes. That motion fails. All right. So on the main motion, Alder McKinney's. Let me get that up here. So on amending section 33.554 of the Madison General Ordinances to remove the option for an alder to serve as an officer of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. All those in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye. Opposed, no.
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 No,
No.
Chair believes it's a unanimous no.
And now would the alternate be in place?
No, the alternate will not
No,
be in
no,
place.
I
So
mean,
we-
an amendment.
but we can
because-
continue to, yeah, we can continue to talk about what we do want to or not recommend.
So to consider placing this item on file with no prejudice, is that in order?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, hold on, I'm seeing a nod, yes. All right, sorry, first, I'm trying to dispense of the vote first and then move on. So I'm still waiting for all votes to be counted and then we move on to the placing it on file. Is that making sense? So the motion that Alder Harrington McKinney first presented, I'm sorry, still trying to finish that vote. I didn't get all of the, I think I got all no's, but I didn't hear everybody speak. Alder Harrington McKinney, did you vote one way or another on that?
No. No, that
Okay.
I did not vote.
Okay, so just an abstention? You want to go down
Yes.
as, or? Okay. All right, so that motion fails. Alder Furman, go ahead.
So Chair, I mean, there is no need for another motion unless somebody wanted to send another thing. I mean, at this point, we're going to send you know, a vote of no on it.
No, right. Thank you for the clarification. All right, so there's no recommendation in either case. Moving on then, thank you all for getting through that with me. Legistar 67432, authorizing the city to execute a non-competitive service contract with AECOM Technical Services for Phase 3A 60% and 90% design engineering services associated with East-West Bus Rapid Transit.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I provided a small action summary sheet. I think we are going to try and start to use those. You saw it also for the transit network redesign. AECOM team, which is a consultant team of about 10 sub-consultants, was selected to do our phase 1 planning and the phase 2 preliminary design. This is a continuation of their services they've been performing satisfactorily and have met our expectations. And so this will be the third contract with them, and then we will have probably a fourth contract with them to do contract drawings. For this particular contract, there was a pretty aggressive disadvantaged business enterprise goal, very high, and they've satisfied that with their enlistment of disadvantaged businesses. So we just recommend approval. And I'm available for questions.
I have to remember to use the participants part of mute and unmute myself, otherwise I just jump around on the other videos, jump around. Anyway, questions for Tom? Seeing none. Is there a motion? Audrey?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Alder Furman. Audrey, did you want to speak to your motion?
No. Good.
All right, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, on the motion to recommend authorizing the city to execute a non-competitive service contract with AECOM Technical Services for Phase 3A 60% and 90% design engineering services associated with East-West Bus Rapid Transit. All those in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, it will go down as unanimous. Thank you. Next item is Legistar 67565, 20 is plenty, East Washington feed results.
Yeah.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. As you all know, that one thing that the Madisonians heard a lot about recently, and also talk a lot about, is speed. So today we want to discuss with you a couple items related to speed on our roadways, efficacy of 20 Easy Plenty program, and also the speed on East Washington Avenue. Many of you are very knowledgeable, and you all know that for a long time, the way that the industry set a speed limit is mostly based on 85 percentile of the speed of actually how fast people driving on roadway. It's not based on how much we want people, how fast we want people to drive. That method works on for some situations, but also has its limitations. In my opinion, especially for complex urban areas where we have lots of pedestrians, bicyclists, and we really want to prioritize their safety, and we want to provide a more equitable infrastructure for all users. It doesn't work very well. Just a few months ago, an organization called the National Association of Transportation Officials, NACTO, so they put out a guideline. It's called city limits. How to set the safe speed limits in urban areas. I think me and also some of my colleagues working for cities, really identifies with it. It proposed some new mechanism to set speed limits. Even though I think many of my peers in the industry may not agree to it, but in my opinion, it works better for cities. One of the things that it points out is that for most of the residential streets in cities, 20 miles per hour is the proper design speed for them. It's a proper speed limit for them, based on how people drives and the characters of the street, the residential nature, and for better safety, 20 miles per hour is really a good speed for it, and that's without the need for more detailed study for those individual streets. And our 20 Plenty program is centered on the same idea that a speed limit of 20 miles per hour is appropriate for local residential streets. And the purpose of the program is to increase the safety of all users, pedestrians, bicyclists, motor vehicles on these streets. And speed plays a major role in the outcome of a crash when it does happen. The lower speed, the better chance for pedestrians to survive a crash with a motor vehicle or walk away without major injuries. So you all know that this year,
Yang,
we
do you mean to be sharing
started
slides?
implementing.
Yang, are you intending to share slides? Because it sounds like you're going.
I'm sorry.
You are meaning to share slides right now?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So now
Yeah.
can you see?
No, we can't see
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
I just wanted
sorry, apologize
too
for
far
that.
into it.
Yeah.
I thought I should alert you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. For some reason, yeah, it's really weird today for me. Yeah. And I cannot see everyone. So, there's some glitch here. So apologize for that. But hopefully now you can see the location map, right, for the 2020, the phase 1 project. But you really didn't miss much on this. Though I just talked about the just went through a couple of slides.
We still cannot see.
You still cannot see. So okay. So let me try again. Let me stop sharing and start sharing again. How about now?
There we go. That's it.
Okay. Okay. Apologies for that. Again, not sure what happened. But yeah, we just went through a couple slides, and now we're on the third slide. And thank you, Tom, for letting me know. Yeah, now actually I can see everyone, so it's nice. Okay, so this year we started implementing this program, the phase 1 of it, in 2 neighborhoods in Madison, the Tenny-Napa neighborhood on the Isthmus, and also the Teresa Hammerstein neighborhood in South Madison. And you know, before we implemented the programs, we really looked whether this is going to be effective. We are actually working on gathering some data to do some before and after analysis using a database called Streetlight. So we're trying to get some local data for that. But I want to update you on some data that we found through other communities who did similar programs. So in the slides attached in Legistar, we have one slide actually for our Toronto, Canada. So I'm not going to talk about that one, as even though that's a really good one, and they did a comparison. They reduced speed in one area and compare that to another area, which they didn't do speed reduction. And they found about a 30% reduction in pedestrian motor vehicle crashes and a 7% reduction on serious injury crashes and fatal crashes. So that's really good example, but they also point out that the study was not statistically significant. So I'm not going to talk too much about that one. However, we do have 2 examples that are statistically significant. One of them is for Portland. So a few years ago, Portland reduced their default speed limit for residential streets from 20 to 25 miles per hour. And Portland State University did a study for many streets in the city. And what they found is that they saw a very small reduction in average and mean speed in a city, but that's a significant reduction, even though very small. But more importantly, they also found that the largest difference in before and after periods was people driving really fast. Specifically, people drive above 30 miles per hour. That was decreased, from so this average data. Some streets actually saw higher speed, but more streets saw lower speed. So this is the average. So the speed of people, the percentage of people driving over 30 miles per hour reduced from 6.49% to 4.83%. So that's about 25% reduction of people who drive really fast. As you all know, that really matters, because what really caused a lot of fatalities and injuries are those high speeds. We also look into Seattle. Seattle has been doing quite a few speed reduction. They reduced the speed for small residential streets from 25 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour. They are also reducing speed limit on arterial streets, mostly from 30 miles per hour or above to 25 miles per hour. With some streets being reduced to 30 miles per hour and 35 miles per hour. So the latest study is from last year, July 2020. And this study is about the group of streets they reduced to 25 miles per hour. And they found that total crashes decline injury crash decline, 50 percentile speed and 85 percentile speed also decline. And that's basically, and also high end speeding decline. That's basically for every location that is they reviewed. And I want to point out that that's just by lowering the change of speed limit sign and also installing more signs. They didn't do any marketing campaigns, or they didn't even provide any additional enforcement. They didn't real-time traffic signals, and they didn't do any geometric changes for this project. So there's more detail for this group of streets, and all crashes reduced by 22%, injury crashes reduced by 18%, and 50 percentile speed reduced by 10%, 85 percentile speed reduced by 7%, and people driving above 40 miles per hour reduced by 54%. So those are really good data. And I think that gives us confidence that we'll see good data from results from our phase 1 projects. And we'll bring those data back to the board once we have them. So with that, should I move on to East Washington Avenue and then we take questions together? Or should I take a pause and answer questions that you may have on East Planting?
Any questions on what we've seen so far? Alder Furman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Yang the additional background on this. I think I assume part of this discussion came out of my question last week about the capital budget and the spending, and really trying to get a better idea. Are we getting the most bang for our buck? Spending $615,000 on new signs, opposed to, as Alder Foster was a little bit more detailed than I was on, possibly other projects. And so, appreciate seeing these results and do, want to give you an opportunity to, kind of address, besides just showing us the results, that idea of, the comfort level of traffic engineering. That yes, if you were given only $615,000, and I know obviously that's not the case, but it is also a lot of money, and there are a lot of different projects that can happen. That this is the best way to do it, or this is one of just many tools that are available to us, and it's really up to this body to make a recommendation and the council to decide. Okay, this is one of the tools we've got. Should we be putting it here or somewhere else?
Thank you, Alder Furman.
Yeah, go ahead, Alder Foster.
I'm sorry. So I apologize. There was a question there. I apologize. I didn't phrase that well. I'll try to be a little bit clearer. It is the position of traffic engineering that this is, with all the different projects that could be done, this is a very good, efficient use of funds. Is that clear? Is that the clear position?
Yeah, sorry, Alder Furman, that I didn't catch that question. I thought it was a general comment. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, we after reviewing the studies from others, and after we look at it in our situation, we really feel like this is a very good use for the money. It just involves mostly signing change. It involves a lot of of course, staff time to review and plan for it. But we feel like the program is going to create a long-lasting impact on our community. I think it's part of our effort, really, to help foster safety culture that encourages people to slow down and let people know that we share the streets. The streets not just motor vehicles, just not for throughput. These streets used by all different purposes, and we feel like this will have positive impact for the livability of our neighborhoods for many years to come. We definitely think this is probably one of the best proposals we put together, even though it costs a significant amount of resources.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. And that was helpful to hear that just clearly articulated, Yang. Thank you. On the Portland results, it looked like just like the kind of bottom five, or physically on the bottom five here, those were the best results, right? I'm reading that correctly. They had the biggest reduction in over 30 speed. Was there in this report, was there any analysis around, did those streets have any characteristics in common? Like what, it seems like a really big difference for those, just bottom 2, 3, or even 6 that are somewhere around the 5% or more reduction as compared to all the rest of them. It looks like a little bit like noise, like, well, a little bit faster, a little bit slower. Anything about those streets that to explain why they saw such a significant reduction?
That's a great question. From my glance through the report, I didn't notice much, but I hope Jeremy and my staff work on this who can be here. But I'm wondering if Tom has been heavily involved in this. I'm wondering if Tom, you have more information on that.
No, the links to the study I think have been provided to different people. They did provide maps, and they kind of had a map showing one area versus the other area. I don't know why some were more effective than others.
Okay, and then
but we can try to figure it out, and we can follow up with you on that.
Yeah, and maybe if you're able to share the link, I'd be willing to just look through the kind of whole study as well, see if I can find anything. And then my other question was just, I know you kind of emphasized that I think most of these results are really simply by putting up the sign. Both putting up a sign and then obviously a sign that says 20 versus 25, is good. Have any of these communities done anything else in addition as part of this program to further emphasize or kind of change the nature of the streets in addition to the signage changes?
That's a wonderful question. I think it's I think to various degree, yeah. When we talk to our counterparts in Seattle, the specific I emphasize that they want to do an experiment, so they hold it on to these streets and they didn't do anything else. So that's they did that by intention, and they found that even without all those things, just by changing the speed limit signs and by installing more of them, it works. For other communities, I think sometimes other change happened, some other change didn't happen. So they didn't specifically saying that we just hold all other variables constant. We just look at this variable. So yeah, to some degree, they make some other improvements as well.
So I guess my last one, just thinking about this going forward, I've heard a lot of skepticism, I think, from members of the public about this initiative, about really any initiative to lower speed limits. And so I think this is a really good start to explain why we are taking these steps. I think there is good evidence that shows that it can make an improvement. And I think the mayor had a blog post today that kind of shared some of this information as well. I think it'll be really helpful if we really work to get something very digestible and kind of summary format, good visual up where alders and others can really point residents who are saying like, why in the world are we doing this? This isn't going to help. The people that are whipping through at 40 miles an hour, that's 20 mile an hour stop, speed limit sign's not going to change it. I think one, just let's make sure that we are telling this story more broadly than here tonight. And then secondly, I think it's also important to also communicate that this is one strategy among many, right? And I know we've been telling that story, I think, pretty well as it relates to East Washington, but I think we should also make sure that that people don't think this is our answer to all traffic issues and speeding in the city is, 20 is plenty, now we're done, right? I know that's not the way that staff is thinking about it, but I think perhaps it'll just be important in our overall kind of messaging and communication with the community to help reinforce, no, this is a recommendation for something that we can do, costs a big chunk of money, but should have a broad positive impact. but that's not the end of the story. That doesn't mean that now we've done that and we're done, and you should expect to have a perfect street, or we're not going to do anything else in the future. So just I think thinking about that as part of the broader Vision Zero initiative and how we communicate that, because I definitely picked up on a lot of folks, I think, having some misunderstandings about it and some kind of venting frustrations and kind of dismissing this initiative, I think in particular, as one that's maybe not worthwhile. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send the links.
Yeah, that's a great point.
There's quite a bit of literature on 20 is plenty coming out of Great Britain. They've done quite a few studies, but we've chosen not to share that because it's really kind of a different European mindset that where they have automated and like we can get this done. And then I think the future information that Yank's going to share in about 3 minutes provides actually Madison-centric narrative of what we've already seen speed limit reductions do.
Yeah, I want to say that Alder Foster has a really good point that 2020 definitely is not the only thing we're going to do. It's rather a start point. It's part of the our effort to change the culture, the safety culture in medicine. And we definitely want to where appropriate incorporate a lot of other improvements to it. Like we discussed the partnering this program with some of the shared street, slow street program. I think those definitely has a lot of synergies over there. And I think we probably don't care that much about doing a scientific study of whether the signing change will work or not, or it's just because of that. I mean, even for Seattle's experiment, scientifically speaking, you still cannot link the the signing change directly to the spirit to those results, right? There could be other things going on. That's not controlled by the city, but just because of other things. To be totally scientific, you have to hold all those variables constant, and you have to maybe follow a group of drivers, for example, looking at speed, give them same condition for same time of day, same road, to see how fast they drive before and after, which basically is not possible. I think the data is helpful, and we definitely will try to show you some data as we move forward, as we get those. But I think we really want to achieve, our end goal is a better safety culture in our community, and safer streets. So we just use data as a tool.
All right, any additional questions or comments? Seeing
Okay,
none,
if not, I'll move on to.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Yeah. If not, I'm going to move on to East Washington Avenue, and I'm happy to answer questions on this and 2020 afterwards as well. So last year when the pandemic first started, despite all the bad things and the challenges that COVID brought to us, many transportation professionals, I think including me, have some at least have some optimism for one thing. We predict that traffic volume will go down, number of crashes will go down, and traffic fatalities will decrease. So unfortunately, we were only half right. So the number of crashes did go down with fewer people driving. However, the total fatalities increased significantly. Especially for pedestrians. So this data is from Governor's Highway Safety Association. Pedestrian deaths actually soared in 2020, despite people driving less. The projected fatality rate for people walking spiked 21%. So that's the largest ever year-over-year increase. And in locally here in Madison, we saw the same thing, especially on East Washington Avenue. So 2021, we already had 6 fatal crashes along East Washington Avenue. And among these 6, all of them occurred during off-peak hours. And 5 out of the 6 occurred at night, particularly most of them after midnight. 4 of the 6 occurred on segments where post speed limits is 35 miles per hour or greater. So that's basically a segment from Marquette, from Highway 30 to all the way to city limit. Actually, this one is actually on the freeway segment. And 3 out of 6 potentially involve alcohol. As during pandemic, we also saw alcohol consumption soared. For example, in Wisconsin, for the year ended June 36th year, alcohol sale was up 17%. That's the largest single increase since 1972. As you all know, with our Vision Zero efforts, we did a lot of safety data analysis, and we came up with the interim high injury network. Actually, UW Tufts Lab is helping us to come up with a permanent high injury network. But even from the interim version that the city staff came up with, we saw some streets really jump out. And about 2/3 of all fatal crashes occurred on 10% of our streets, and 3/4 of all severe injuries occurred on the 10% of our streets. And East Wash definitely is one of them. So since that, we have been making improvements, targeting these high injury streets, such as East Washington Avenue. And for East Washington Avenue particularly, we installed high visibility crosswalks and improved lighting at Marquette, and installed quite a few RFBs. So those are the newer style pedestrian flashers, helping people cross the street at Butler, Reski, Blount, Second. And we improved signing at Lexington and installed the continental crosswalks and pedal warning signs at Schmidtman. And specifically with Vision Zero funds, we upgrade all crosswalks from Pinckney to Baldwin to continental crosswalks. So significantly changed how the streets feel for that very long segment. And we're installing bollards on the median at the Livingston intersection to help protect pedestrians when they wait in the median for that 2-stage crossing. And we reduced speed limit from Pinckney to Baldwin to 25 miles per hour, and reduced speed limit from Baldwin to Marquette to 30 miles per hour. And we retimed all the traffic signals to promote the reduced speed. So these are more permanent type of improvements. We also made some additional interim improvements as well on temporary basis. Most visibly, we have set up temporary lane closures on weekends using construction barriers on East Washington Avenue just to reduce the capacity and to curb the racing activities on weekends. And since we noticed that most crashes happen at night, we really checked all lighting along East Washington Avenue corridor, and have been working with forestry to get all trees trimmed so that they are not blocking the streetlights. We made additional signal adjustments, just trying to disrupt the unsafe driving behavior when people are racing. And we provide temporary message boards and also permanent message boards to encourage drivers to slow down. We also install temporary speed boards, giving people feedback how fast you drive and ask them to watch their speed. Recently, we have also been experimenting with more creative messaging, really trying to grab people's attention. So, they actually consciously slow down. And MPD also has stepped up enforcement greatly. So for 2021, the past 9 months, they issued over 2,500 warnings and citations. I'm happy to report that the city efforts are having some positive effects. When we look at some data that we got again from Streetlight, which is the big mobility data service, the process billions of anomalous data records from people's smartphones and GPS devices, and they really give us some really good idea on how people move around on the streets. So these are some examples. On East Washington Avenue near Ohio River, we did some analysis. So we took the data from May 2020 and compared to data in May 2021. So a whole month data for both years. And that's before, in 2020, that's before the city started to respond to the situation. And in 2021, that's after we implemented all different measures, such as speed reduction. We really see a big difference. The average speed actually didn't reduce much, only by 1 or 2 miles per hour. But we make a big difference on people who drive very fast, particularly people driving above 40 miles per hour. So the yellow line is the 2021 data, and the blue line is the 2020 data. So we have seen a lot of shifting from higher end to the medium end. That's from above 40 miles per hour to somewhere between 25 to 35 miles per hour. We also see some lower end speed actually also increase, but those are fine. Instead of driving like 10, 15 miles per hour, if you drive at 25 miles per hour, that's really not a problem. And in total, people driving over 40 miles per hour were reduced from 8% to just a little bit above 1%. So that was inbound data. And we saw the same situation for outbound data. Again, we saw a lot of shifting from a higher end of driving speed to some of the lower medium end. And percent of people driving over 40 miles per hour were reduced from 10% to just under 1%. And we also looking, so those were all day data. We also picked out some of the most troublesome time. That's from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. When people may came out from bars or had a few drinks, or just maybe after some night shift of work and hurry to get home and they are tired. So we look at how speed looks like during that time. We saw the same thing. We saw a lot of shifting from higher speed to medium speed, and people driving the over 40 miles per hour were reduced from about 12% to under 1%. So those are some of the really good results. But overall, we saw a 30%, 90% reduction on people driving over 40 miles per hour. Again, I think those really should make a difference because those high speed are the most dangerous. So we're still working on additional measures because we still have significant number of people driving very fast. And we will continue to work on it, trying to persuade them to slow down as well. And one thing we're doing is more creative messaging. So in the past, when we install speedboard message boards, we use pretty standard language, right? We ask people to slow down. We ask people to watch our speed. After a while, people just got used to it, and they may not even say it, so they just drive by. So we really want to grab people's attention, and we have coming up with a long list of funny messages, or really striking messages, or messages targeting some specific group of drivers, such as youth or other type of drivers, and we started using them. So this picture on the right actually is one of the permanent speedboards that we have, but controlled by Wisconsin DOT on East Wash. Actually, the middle line was not working, so the message address says testing and driving. Also no. But you get some idea. We're trying to be funny, be striking, really get people's more attention. But we start working on we start getting more messages over there, because our temporary speedboards on the right typically only handles a small amount of tests. The permanent ones handles much more, but it's controlled by Wisconsin DOT, and they have a strict library. You can only pick up languages from those library. If you want to add anything additional, it's a pretty difficult approval process, but we're working with them on that. Another thing that we are experimenting is actually very creative. It's some gateway treatment to narrow the lanes at intersections using delineators. And Renee actually found this from some community doing this at some low volume, low speed roadways. And X and Tom really brought to the next level. And so now we're experimenting that on East Washington Avenue. So Tom, you would like to talk about this one, or you would like me to cover it?
Why don't you, I think that the effect of this pilot holds a lot of potential and are pretty dramatic. If you go to the next slide, Yang, we have a small video that illustrates this.
Yeah, it does look like my computer has some problems today. It doesn't look like it's playing. Yeah, it played well at the CCEC last week.
Yeah. That's okay.
Sorry. Yeah. But we can give you a description.
Anyhow, what would happen is vehicles would approach this, and they would actually slow down as they approached the narrow lanes. We were worried that perhaps the delineators would be toppled over by either buses or trucks. That didn't occur. If you go to the next lane or the next slide, Yang, the average speed, which is perhaps not our biggest indicator, but it reduced itself by, I believe it was about 7 miles an hour or so, 27% reduction. The 85th percentile, there was a 14% reduction, which was about 5 miles an hour. And then the next slide, which is really what we were just looking at when we were looking at 20 is plenty in the Seattle data, is vehicles traveling over 30 miles an hour. And so we had, it went from basically 78% to 18%. So that's actually a pretty dramatic decrease, 77. Now we only did this for 4 hours. We didn't do it at night. We didn't do it on a weekend. There's a possibility that trucks could influence this, and it might not be able to be applied broadly. But this was a successful pilot, and we want to keep moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I would second that. 7 mile per hour average speed reduction doesn't look like much, but actually it's very significant. From our experience, because most people driving at a reasonable speed, across the board reduced by 7 miles per hour. That's actually a huge number, and that's actually a lot better than Seattle's data actually. But let's move on. We are also working on expanding the speed limit reduction zones to the rest of East Washington Avenue. So as I mentioned, last year we reduced the limit, for this segment from Capitol to almost Highway 30. And this year, right now we're looking into a project, hopefully want to implement next year, to really reduce the limit all the way to East Town. That's as far as the city has any control over. And we have been working on what's a proper speed limit, and we need to work with the state on that. But really try to push the 30-mile-per-hour zone as far east as possible, and maybe have some transition area, a really short transition area before the speed transition to 55 mile per hour, for the freeway segment. And we are also planning to expand the crosswalk treatments for all the way along East Washington Avenue. We really feel like the continental crosswalks we installed last year made a lot of difference, really changed how the street perceives, and remind the drivers unconsciously that pay attention, slow down. Here's a lot of pedestrian activities. So coupled with the pedestrian warning signs, we feel like this makes a lot of difference. And as I mentioned, that the two segments, I will back up a little bit. The two segments, it's about the same distance, but we saw 4 deaths, for this segment where we have a higher speed limit, and we didn't do the continental crosswalks, and we saw 2 deaths in this slower zone with crosswalk treatments. So it may tell us that those treatments may have some effects on that, and so we will do our best to expand those treatments to all the corridor. We are also working on some longer term improvement, even though we know some of this will take time. For example, we really need some more fundamental redesign of the corridor. And we need to do more aggressive transportation demand management. Really trying to reduce our reliance on single occupancy vehicles. And we want to see modal shift from single occupancy vehicles to transit, biking, and walking. And we have to reduce VMT, vehicle miles traveled, for many good reasons, not just for safety, but for sustainability as well. We also have been pursuing automatic enforcement. As we all know that our police department only have a finite amount of resources. It's impossible for them to keep up with the enhanced enforcement all the time. And there are also equity improvements that need to be made on those enforcement, for enforcement to be done by humans. So we're thinking about automatic enforcement would be a big help. But right now, as you all know, it's not legal in the state of Wisconsin. So we have a lot of work to do on that. And really, as we look into the factors behind these crashes, one thing that we realized that we really need to, step out of, our own silo. We need to collaborate with many different agencies and our community really to address some of the social economic issues as well, such as mental health, alcohol, drug use, and really, build a safe culture in our community. That's something that we used to think it's ours responsibility, but I think we really need to step out of the boundary and collaborate with everyone to really achieve zero deaths for our community, for our roadways. So that's all I have, and thank you very much, and we're happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Yang. Any questions? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Got two quick questions or comments. One is I was really happy to see that you're looking at further speed reductions east of Marquette. So I think that comes soon enough. Just as when you're doing that, perhaps it would be worth reconsidering the Baldwin to Marquette section also that was reduced down to 30 to see if there's not good rationale to bring that all the way down to 25, and perhaps that can help support, bringing it down to 30 in that further east out section. So it'd just be good to take another look at that. It's a really highly populated area, lots of pedestrian crossings through that section. And then my question was, has there been any look at the kind of Highway 30 interchange? You mentioned sort of a transition zone coming in from the freeway, out by Easttown, but I think that's another. You've got people traveling at 60 miles an hour and, take the ramp and all of a sudden they're on East Washington. I don't even know what exactly kind of treatments could apply there. And I'm sure you'd have to coordinate with WSDOT, but just curious if you've had any conversations about that or any ideas of ways to help have a better transition from essentially that freeway, right on to East Washington there at Highway 30.
Yeah, so that first, we I think our eventual goal for Baldwin to Marquette, we want 25 mile per hour. And we'll take a look at the whether we each time now we just reduced the speed limit last year, and for our segment, definitely there west of Baldwin. We have more, definitely a lot of activities justified 25 miles per hour. But we'll take a look at, this segment now. Even if not next year, we're going to come back looking at those. And eventually, I think we would like to, go down to 25 miles per hour. Excellent point about the transition, from a high speed area to low speed area. That's right. That's exactly right. That's why these projects. Actually not just about just go out to just change the speed limit signs. There's a lot of planning work and engineering work behind that. So we are actually two areas actually we are thinking, and I think we need to definitely work more with the state. One is as you mentioned the Highway 30 area as people come off the ramp. How can we let people know you are in a much lower speed zone now? So that's one focus area. We don't have very good answers yet, but I think we will. Another area actually is more challenging is just from just on East Wash as people drives in from a San Prairie area. From a 55-mile zone reduced to, let's say, if you want to do 35, how can we let people know that need to slow down very quickly? So definitely challenges, and we definitely need to work with our counterparts at the state to make it work. But that's something that we're working on right now.
Thanks for the overall update. I know this is a really, really challenging. I know a lot of people really care a lot about it. It's, a lot of people are very frustrated about it, but it's really great to get the update to know how hard everybody's working on it, and really just encourage you to continue to put all that energy into it because it really does matter. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions or comments for Yang? All right, seeing none, thanks again, Yang, for that presentation. We'll then move on to Legistar 67566, our draft Vision Zero action plan.
All right, so I think,
sure.
yep. All right. All right, so thanks everyone. We hopefully people had a chance to take a look at the updated draft. We just wanted to review some of the bigger changes with everyone. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you can kind of look at things that have changed. And I'm going to turn it over to Allie for, I think, yes, I know Carrie, but I'm Renee Calloway, the pedestrian bicycle administrator, who has been co-leading this project. And I will turn it over to Allie.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So just briefly go over the action plan table of contents. Pretty similar to last time. We have that letter from the mayor and policymakers, the dedication page, why Vision Zero guiding principles, the data section. We did add some things to the data section, as you see in red. Ongoing engagement section, the disproportionate impact analysis. And then we have a strategies and action section, which is those factor sections. And number 7 is the implementation and accountability section, and that's brand new. And sections under that is the short-term actions, Vision Zero and other initiatives, a measuring and reporting progress section, and then lastly, references. So this is just a brief example, just showing that the pages look very similar, nothing really changed like last time. So the color is the same, layout's the same. It's just an example of what the pages will look like. And this just shows more pages and how the pages are represented. We have 2 paragraphs or 2 columns on each side. So very similar to last time, like I said. All right, and so this is the same as last time, the factor section. We did add a lot to these sections, and but the factor sections are the same. We have 5 of them. Safe streets, which is a section on building streets to account for human error and build safely for all modes of transportation. Safe people, which focuses on engaging with communities to gather feedback and encourage safe behavior. Safe vehicles, which focuses on fleet services and advancing safe technology. Safety data factor section, which focuses on data to see where the most severe and deadly crashes occur and why, and what are the causes of those crashes. And lastly, the safety focused enforcement section, which really focuses on enforcing safely, strategically, while educating and being aware of the disparities that exist. All right, so just going over some of the sections briefly that changed. So for safe streets, we did add a strategy section, advocate for changes to state statutes and increase funding that would improve the city's ability to advance goals of Vision Zero. So this section was added, and an example action item under the strategy would be advocate for the ability to conduct automated traffic enforcement. Next slide. For safe peoples, this section was actually in safe peoples, but we moved this to the top of the section because it is a very important strategy of safe people, and that is expand and support alternatives to driving, reducing BMT. And an action item example under this strategy would be implement a TD ordinance. For this section, changes strategy, safety focused enforcement. This section was changed dramatically just by the beginning paragraphs. So as you remember, the last time it was very lengthy. It was about almost 2 pages long. And so we cut that back to just a few paragraphs for the first section. And we took a lot of the information from this section
last time and moved it to a different part of the action plan, as we'll get into later. But as far as safe vehicles and safety data, nothing really changed in those sections.
All right. So, some of the other things that we wanted to highlight that have changed is one of the things that we heard from everyone was that the overall plan lacks some cohesiveness. And it sounded like many people wrote it, which is the truth. Quite a few people wrote it. So we have just been working on the language to make it flow better. So hopefully you've noted that it's starting to get better. Also, we updated some of the charts and graphs on demographics. You'll notice that per sort of the way the city uses language, we updated where we had sex to gender, which matches kind of the way the city talks about that. As mentioned, the safety focused enforcement section was kind of a report within the action plan. So we did move some sections to the disparate impact analysis to kind of improve the overall flow of the document. And then we added in the disparity information that we have on overall crashes, as well as our high injury network map that shows our sort of racial equity, social justice areas to make a more focused disparate impact analysis section. So you'll see in there some information on disparities, and this data comes from public health. It comes from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. Right now, we just have it by Dane County because they collect the data and share it out county, and it comes from hospital data. And so we will, in the data section, we want to continue working with public health once the pandemic allows them a little bit more time to re-engage with this project. They were involved at the beginning, but obviously their focus has changed to kind of continue to dig into this piece of data. But I think what you see in Dane County is reflective of what you would find in the city. So we are including that right now. And so we have just a variety of things related to that information to kind of expand the way we're looking at disparities. And this is the traffic enforcement piece that's in there that we moved into that section. Tries to kind of start to get at the safety focused enforcement group of looking at disparities in traffic. And then this is just the map using our current interim high injury network and pulling out kind of so that you can better get a visual grasp on the disparities in where those streets that are having the serious and fatal crashes as well. We've also started to include our first phase of engagement from what, for those of you who've been on the committee, know we're calling Let's Talk Streets, which is informing this and our Complete and Green Streets project. We'll have more to add to that. And I think at your next meeting, we'll be coming back with more information on the engagement that we've been doing in phase 2. So we'll continue to add that in and have that reflected in the work that throughout the whole document. And, it could add or change some things within the strategies and actions. So we definitely are continuing to work on that. And you will see that we have been working on a variety of the different goals, costs, timeline pieces to continue refining those strategies and actions, which are so important to the overall mission of Vision Zero. Big section that we added, implementation and accountability, both what we're currently doing, as well as how this, will interface with Complete and Green Streets, because I think they're very interrelated in meeting our goals for both, and on measuring and reporting, and then annually updating on our progress. This is just a graph from our engagement. Those of you who've been on the committee will have seen this already. These are just some of the comments that we're hearing from people. Definitely hearing from the community of the importance of safety over convenience and putting people in the work. And definitely hearing from, more people of color, low income neighborhoods, just that they're seeing disparities with what their streets look like. That they want to have the same ability to have safe streets, to visit neighbors, go to local businesses that other wealthier, whiter neighborhoods have. So accountability, really trying to build out this section and really think on what is important to really looking at how we're going to be successful, and also trying to think about how we can do this in a way where all of our work isn't on just making reports on accountability and not actually doing the hard work to make changes. So this is kind of where we're at now in terms of trying to look at all of the different safe people, safe streets, safety, safe vehicles, and traffic safety enforcement to come up with some realistic things that we can use as metrics. So a variety of things that we have so far, definitely including equity within that to ensure that we're holding ourselves accountable to really addressing those disparate outcomes that we're seeing in traffic. And then I have here just to be determined, obviously the safety focus enforcement, it's a very big topic. I know a couple of people here, Chris and Alder Foster, are also on that subgroup. And so performance metrics are still to come. We've just been digging into all of the varied issues, which raises more issues. So this is something that we will also be working with that group on. And then the big thing is next steps. We want to continue refining those strategies and actions, getting feedback both through our engagement from here, our implementation and accountability section. Obviously, as I mentioned, we have been working with the UW TOPS Lab to refine our high injury network, and they're getting very close to having an updated product for us and something to discuss. So obviously, that would update the action plan with that. That's a very important piece. We want to make sure we have a good product. We would continue reviewing our data. We're always looking for new things that we can learn from that. This is obviously a data-driven program. So there may be other things that we have to add there. Obviously, the Let's Talk Streets engagement. We want to reflect what we're learning there in our upcoming phases. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do on the reference section. Right now, we have it sometimes in the document and sometimes at the end. So we need to clean all that up. We have the mayor and council message to add. And obviously, the due date for this was extended to March 31st, 2022. But our goal is to have something before that so that we can easily meet that deadline. So that's a pretty quick run through. Hopefully people had a chance to look at it, but I can stop sharing for comments, questions.
Any questions or comments for Renee? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks, Renee. Yeah, I think really strong improvements in the kind of overall layout and formatting. I think it looks really nice. My focus is probably still very much on the kind of that end sections of the goals and strategies and goals and accountability. So would love to see some continued work there, just really getting that as specific and actionable as possible. So I think specifically two things I would maybe have you all take a look at is in cases where the lead agency says like citywide, I think that's a problem. I think somebody has to be accountable or nobody's going to be accountable. So we kind of ran into this in our conversations in the enforcement thing, right? Like one of the actions is let's get the state to approve enforcement. Well, that's who's accountable citywide. Well, as we talked in our subgroup, well, okay, who owns that? Well, nobody apparently. So I think we should really press ourselves to have someone, even if there's partners involved, et cetera, somebody has to be actually lead or nobody's leading. And if we can't figure it out, honestly, we should probably just leave it out rather than put it in there as a generic thing, because it's not going to get done, I think. Similarly, under the timeline, I think any place where we have ongoing, I would really question that. I mean, if it's something that we're just doing and there's no actual, like it's not going to be done by a certain time, then is that really an action item? So I would really, again, press ourselves to do that. If we don't think we can realistically do it in the next 5 years, then maybe it should be not in there as an action item. We don't think so, because my hope would be that every action item in there has a clear owner, and that there's an understanding and a commitment that those items will form part of work plans for whatever agency is taking lead on them. So I think just in general, those two areas, really make sure that the action itself is very clear, it's specific. And then I think in that goal column, a lot of them already have really clear metrics, like X number of lights are distributed, or the plan is complete, or these many things are rolled out. And I almost it almost feels like if we committed to that, to those sections, maybe we don't need like a separate accountability section, but rather if every single one of the action items is clear, has a clear owner, a clear timeline, and a clear goal, like what the end result is, that to me should then be the accountability, as we can just run through those action items and say, okay, this is year one, which ones got done? Are we on track for the ones that are supposed to happen in year 2, year 3, et cetera? So in general, I think that's where I would recommend focusing for the next draft, is just really pressing ourselves and saying like, how can we make sure that none of these things just disappear into the ether and like, oh, I thought you were doing it. I thought you were doing it. Oh, I guess it didn't get done. And yeah, it might be a good idea or a great general concept, but let's not call it an action item unless we're really prepared to get it done. But overall, really great work. Thanks for the update.
All right, thank you. Margaret, go ahead.
Hi, Renee, just a quick thought on the section or on the bullet point about safe routes to schools, pedestrian and bicycle education. One of the things that's happened while in this pandemic year and a half, 2 years, where are we at now, is a significant watering down of the requirements for teenagers and to get driver's license. And driver's ed, access to driver's ed is clearly an equity issue, since I believe it has been discontinued with MMSD. So don't want to throw a huge new project in with that everything, but since you are clearly going to be working with MMSD and on safe routes to schools, and I would hope that the DOT would be publishing some data, as we get it, about collision rates, fatalities, et cetera, among this group. That, yes, I know we want to reduce VMTs, but we know that teenagers are going to get driver's licenses. So what can we do to incorporate safety training, defensive driving training? But otherwise, it looks very good. Thank you for all your work.
Yeah, no, definitely something that's on our radar with the change in how it works over time and with the new relaxing of how people get their driver's licenses. So definitely on the radar as an issue.
All right, thank you. Any further questions or comments on this item? All right, thank you. Then we will move on to Legistar 67567, TDM proposal refinements.
Hi, let me share my screen real quick.
Philip, maybe why don't you introduce yourself? I'm not sure if the TPP has met you.
My name is Philip Ritzmacher, and my computer's apologize. Hopefully you guys can see me. I am a planner in transportation. I started back in July, and if I seem familiar, it's because I worked with
Who? Philip, would you like me to share the slides while you?
Yeah, I'm actually frozen inside of the slides.
Yeah, so why don't I I'll get the slides up and I'll progress through them.
I can see them now, but yeah, okay.
And there, can everyone see the slides? Yes, okay. So, Philip, you can just say next.
Okay. Well, I apologize, and it now will not allow me to show my screen or my camera either. So it's not that I don't want to show you what I look like; it's that I can't.
Yeah.
So today, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the draft TDM program revisions that we've put together. Next slide, please. So we identified 4 different issue areas that we wanted to take care of based on stakeholder, elected official, and staff feedback. And then I want to demonstrate the impact on the illustrative projects that you saw from the previous iterations of the plan, and then talk about the next steps that we're going to need to take in this process. Next slide, please. So the first issue that we heard is that it was way too difficult for the TDM program to be applied to peripheral developments. So the previous draft of the plan relied heavily on walk score to derive base points. So the actual score that you'd have to meet was based on walk score. So the further out that you got, the less things there are to walk to. So your requirements go up. And at the same time, some of the measures that you can implement aren't available because of where you are. So this could penalize a catalytic development. So let's say it's the start of a mixed use center on the periphery, and it's a nice mixed use project. That project might have very high TDM requirements. And then the project that locates next to it might have modest requirements because of the project that came before it. Next slide, please. And then at the same time, there are projects that are potentially on the edge of the city that could be pushed out to an adjoining community. So that's something that we wanted to avoid. This is one of the projects that we'll take a look at later, but it's right on the edge of Verona, and they could easily relocate there if the requirements that we're imposing are too stringent and not achievable. Next slide, please. So a resolution for that issue is basically a system of modifiers and base points for transit service. This is derived from Denver and Seattle's TDM programs. So basically, we reduce the TDM requirements based on a multiplier the further they get from the downtown core, while at the same time providing base points for areas within the transit service area. We also reduce the amount of points that a project could achieve for certain programmatic measures based on the accessibility of those measures to the proposed project. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing here is kind of the areas that we would look at. So the area that's outlined, and I'm not sure, are you guys seeing the outline in blue or red? Red? Okay, it's just me then. So the area in red is the BRT service area, and then there are 4 different color gradations. And the main idea there would be that would be what you multiply the points by to come up with the amount of TDM that you'd actually have to achieve. So the area within the BRT service area is an area where we would like to see density focused. So as a result, we're requiring more TDM there with the idea that those projects would be bigger and that there would be more ability to meet the actual TDM requirements. Part of that is the base points that they would receive for being along the BRT line. So these percentages were derived based on the context of the urban environment there. And on the periphery, we tested a number of projects until we were able to get something that was achievable with more than just one option for meeting the TDM requirements. Next slide, please. And this would be the base transit points that a project would get. So if it's within the BRT service area, the project would immediately get 5 points. If it's within the all-day service area, they would get 3 points, peak only 1 point, and outside of transit, nothing at all. So that, again, is kind of a way to balance it out and focus development in areas that are most conducive to that new development. Next slide, please. And then I spoke a bit about the modifiers. So this would basically discourage a development or developer from proposing mitigation measures that aren't appropriate for a given area. So let's say the project is outside of the transit service area and they propose providing 100% subsidized transit passes. We would only give them half credit for that. There still could be some benefit but the benefit clearly wouldn't be as strong as if it were within the BRT service area. Same thing with bike sharing and car sharing. Next slide, please. So the next issue that we heard is that there were way too many TDM options. So the initial plan had 57 measures and options, so variations of those measures, which could lead to confusion. We looked at a number of other TDM plans. Denver's, which came out last year, has 27 options. Cambridge only has 8. A number of other plans fall somewhere in between there. But the number of options and measures that we have could lead to confusion and might lead to some unintended consequences, which I'll get into in just a moment. Next slide, please. So to streamline these measures, we eliminated things that could be confusing or were just kind of there for everybody. So the basic measures where you get points for assigning a TDM coordinator or following the bike parking in the city ordinance, got rid of things like that. Things that might have unintended consequences, like paying for a cab or an Uber to BRT, eliminated measures like that. The thought being that someone might just decide to take that cab to their home or to their workplace. And then getting rid of measures that could be confusing to people, like no drive aisle crossing, where you have to really dive in and figure out what that means. Measures like that, eliminated them. They could still be proposed under innovative measures if someone wanted to, but we didn't want to kind of confuse people in that way. So this really creates a cleaner set of measures that are easier to understand. Next slide, please. So we worked it down to 43 measures and reorganized the categories into categories that we thought were a little bit easier to understand. There were categories that were grouping, buckets of measures together. So we worked to streamline it so that you can easily figure out what measures might be applicable to the categories, or which categories might be applicable to find the measures that you want to apply. Next slide, please. A third issue was that the TDM points themselves weren't appropriately balanced. So this is something that we heard from developers, that the point values should more closely reflect the cost of implementing measures. And one thing that staff noticed is that there were some highly effective measures that were not being given enough points. So one of those measures in particular, some of the priced parking and parking cash out measures that actually influence behavior weren't being rewarded with a high number of points. And the pandemic has raised questions about whether certain measures that weren't included should actually be included, measures such as working from home and telecommuting. The jury's not out on whether that actually reduces VMT or not, or raises it. There are a number of studies that with conflicting information. We wanted to cover our bases and include it in the program, so they're in the program with just 1 point. Next slide, please. So I'll go through just a couple of the measures that are more significant. So I just mentioned 2 of them. We added working from home and flex schedule policies. Both of them are in the program with 1 point. The idea would be, as more data comes out that makes a case for, I guess, the VMT reduction or lack thereof, we would revisit this particular measure and update accordingly. Priced parking, like I mentioned, market rate parking, cash outs, unbundling, increase the point value from 5 points to 10 points to make it a more attractive option. Shared parking agreements, understanding that those are complicated, often require legal agreements and are permanent, increasing the value from 2 points to 4 points. That could increase density and improve the walkability in an area. We also increase the point value for on-site daycare, understanding that having a daycare along or near a workplace or in a near a place of residence might mean that someone is able to take alternative transportation rather than splitting that trip. We increase the value for package drop-off sites, understanding that that could reduce one of those auxiliary trips that someone could take during the day. And it would require a great deal of coordination with outside vendors. Alternative transportation kiosks is kind of beefing up an idea that was in the original program, so that there was an idea to have information available for residents or employees, or have a display that would show the next arrival of a bus. This kind of takes it to the next level and says both of those are required information about alternative transportation, whether that's maps or flyers, plus an on-time arrival display. And then bike share installation was 4 points. We increased that to 6 because of the cost of those installations and the amount of coordination needed for them. Next slide, please. And then we also reduced the scores for measures that are less expensive and less impactful. Things like carpool parking, it's just putting up a sign and it likely doesn't have a strong impact from what we could see. Bus facilities, we reduced the point value there to dissuade from overusing and over-reliance on that as a way to meet TDM requirements. We wouldn't want a peripheral development to have a fully decked out bus stop where it's not necessary. And that maintenance would become Metro's responsibility. Shared fleet of vehicles, we reduced the point value from 4 to 1. The idea being that there could be unintended consequences in office development that is going to have a shared fleet of vehicles anyway, providing that as their TDM requirement and allowing their employees to pick it up and drive home. That could be an option, but understanding that at the same time, that could be used. Someone could take the bus to work and then use the car to go see a client or something like that during the day. And then we lowered the value for bike share memberships to more closely align with car share memberships because they're the same price. Next slide, please. And then our fourth issue was the mall parcels and other planned multi-use sites. So this is like the Village on Park Street, East and West Town malls. These are sites that often have shared parking and may have one ownership or maybe even many owners. There was a thought initially that maybe one change could trigger full compliance the entire site, but that would discourage investment in areas that are already financially challenged and already struggling. Next slide, please. So the idea would be to handle these on a site-by-site basis, applying TDM only to the portion of the site that's being redeveloped, which is very similar to how zoning compliance works. You only bring the portion of the site that's being reactivated or improved into compliance with zoning. So Von Mauer at the Westtown Mall is a good example of this. They are bringing their site into zoning compliance right now, adding parking islands and improving the surface parking lot. That would be an ideal time to bring just that portion of the site into TDM compliance too. So that is the recommendation that we are proposing. Next slide, please. So to go over a couple of the examples that you all saw last time. So this is that peripheral development on Raymond Road. It's a residential project. 20% of it is affordable. It's actually supposed to be 60% or AMI. So I apologize for that. 100 dwelling units, 150 parking stalls. The old point target was 25, and the new one is actually 14. So I apologize. I updated these slides and didn't make it into the save. Next one, please. So we're deriving the new point values. We have the table that helps determine the base points that would be required for TDM. So this is taking away those kind of 3 gimme points that were in the previous program. We're taking that point value that would be required based on the parking ratio and the number of dwelling units and multiplying it by the area. And for this particular location, because there is no transit, car share, or bike share, they would only earn 50% of the points if they were to propose those as programmatic measures. Next slide, please. So in the previous iteration of the plan, to meet 25 points, they would have to do a number of things, some of which may not be feasible, such as providing a shared fleet of cars or installing a bunch of off-site bike and ped infrastructure. So there's questions about the feasibility of some of those things and questions about whether it's an impact fee or not. So there are some issues there. So the threshold's very high. So it'd have to do a number of things. So that under the new program, next slide, please. These infeasible measures are removed, but what's left when you account for affordable housing, unbundling parking, bike maintenance facility, and indoor bike parking, is that they're able to meet this with measures that are a little bit more practical. Unbundling parking probably being one of the more impactful measures anyway, getting people to decide whether or not they want to pay for a parking stall at their apartment or not, or find other methods of transportation. So ultimately, this meets the goal of kind of right sizing the TDM program on the periphery. And we've tested this with office parcels as well and found that it's possible to do it not just with unbundling parking, but with a mixture of other measures. And that was kind of our main goal, is not to have only one path to meeting the requirements. Next slide, please. but it also has the opposite effect on some other projects. So this is a proposed mixed-use development, residential and commercial, on a 2900 block of University Avenue, 50 dwelling units, 10,000 square feet of retail, 110 parking stalls divided between the residential and the retail. The old target was 18 for the residential and 15 for the commercial. The new one is 14 and 11. Next slide, please. So this particular project is within the general urban category, which needs 90% of the points. So we go through and we multiply that out, and that's where we get our new score. This would also earn 100% of the points for transit, car share, and bike share based on its location. Next slide, please. So under the old program, they received a number of points. In fact, more than 50% of the points required based on location and base points. So the things that they were actively doing were providing discounted bike share memberships, building some offsite pedestrian infrastructure, having some marketing information for sustainable transportation options, and then some wayfinding signage. Next slide, please. In the proposed modifications, this project would actually not meet the requirements. So it would still receive points for its proximity to transit. It would receive 5 points for that because it's within the BRT service area. It would receive points for increasing the land use mix. And it would receive points for all of the things that it's recommending get done, but it would need to go a bit further on the residential side. But there are a number of ways to get there. Next slide, please. And some of them they might already be doing, such as covered bike parking, dedicated bike access, providing clothes lockers or showers, alternative transportation kiosks, delivery supportive amenities. They could have a shared or loaner bike for the residents, or they could reduce the overall on-site parking, which would bring them into compliance, and is probably the most desirable option from the city's standpoint. Next slide, please. So we have a lot to do. So what you see on the right-hand side is a spreadsheet that we've been putting together that calculates the requirements automatically for anyone who would partake in the program. It would also be an easy way for staff to kind of go through and work with the developers. So we're working on that. We're also working on how to best address single-family home developments. This program doesn't quite work for it, and that's because it's very reliant on programmatic measures that are difficult to apply to single-family developments. So we're trying to find the best way to resolve that, and that's certainly something that we understand needs to be addressed because those sorts of developments are really driving VMT growth. We also need to figure out if we should be providing points for density. I know that's something that the development community has requested. I think that there's questions at the staff level. And we also need to complete the next draft of the TDM plan and take that out for additional stakeholder and decision maker involvement. And that's about all that we have. So I think we would look for your feedback and appreciate your time. Open for questions.
Thank you, Philip. Are there any questions? Alder Foster, go ahead, please.
Thanks for the great presentation, all the work on the refinements. Actually, could you pull up the map of the kind of new scheme points by area of the city that addresses the peripheral versus BRT? And my question on that one is, should we consider defining that more based on like transit access or even frequency versus like BRT and not? Thinking about the transit network redesign that we saw earlier today, and this idea, that one, the idea of we may have high frequency routes that aren't technically BRT, but there's 15-minute service, and especially thinking forward, hopefully we do get some additional investments in our transit system. We're able to increase transit access in different areas, maybe years before they formally become BRT routes. Should we consider that in how we're thinking about this, rather than, okay, maybe it's not a technically a BRT bus or stop, but if we've got very high frequency transit or good transit access for, maybe that should be part of what drives this. And then the second point on this one, is there, I guess I'm not sure, is the blue area considered like 100%, or how are we treating the downtown in this model as it compared to BRT?
So the downtown area would need to meet 100% of that base TDM requirement, and the idea there is that much of that can be met just based on what's surrounding it already.
Walking and biking, and right, yeah, okay.
So yeah, so the downtown and campus area are treated differently than basically everywhere else. The requirements are higher, but the availability and the impact, honestly, of the measures is higher as well.
So once you cross like Blair Street or whatever that looks, maybe Blair Street,
yep, Blair.
You're in the BRT corridor, then you drop down to 90 then, or?
Correct. But anything within the BRT corridor would remain at 90. So this is at a parcel level. We could certainly refine some of this. And I think that you make good points about the high frequency area. I think the thing that we need to be careful of is changes to this map. So that's something that we need to carefully balance as well.
Yeah, that was one of my other questions, or maybe it's just on your to-do list of future work, is that question of what is going to be the recommendation in terms of the process and the frequency for updating both the map as well as the points, et cetera. How frequently do we anticipate reviewing and making adjustments to those things? So maybe just something to keep on the to-do list. And I guess in general, I like this concept. I think it makes sense to me, and would love to. I don't want to cut ourselves off either. I think it makes sense to have downtown campus 100%, but quite honestly, as the isthmus is getting built up to the degree it is, I'm not sure if you're in Wellington, East Washington, if that's really a significant, if you should get any break as compared to West Campus or something. So if anything, I would like to see that kind of downtown core area grow and make sure that we're really expecting the highest level of TDM from those areas that are, I think that are capable of producing it. One other comment I had was on the grid, like the point grid, if you could pull up. I get why we have kind of intervals, like one that showed the different points for, like that's good. So I was surprised to see, so if you look at the one that's highlighted, 1.5 to 1.99 for medium, 22 points. So I think in the example you were using, it's 100 dwelling units and 150 parking stalls. So if they reduce the parking stalls to 149, they would drop down 5-point requirements just by losing one parking stall out of 150, right? So that, that's less than a 1% reduction in parking, drops their point by 25%. So I don't know if there's a way to maybe be a little bit more granular on that, because that I would expect we'd start to see everybody's 1.99, 1.49, 0.99. And is that really, do we feel like that is, we want to give that kind of a break in TDM of 25% less because of a less than 1% reduction in parking.
That's a good point. I will we'll give that some thought.
Great, thank you again. Really good work. Excited to see this develop.
All right, additional comments or questions? All right, seeing none, thanks, Philip. Thank you to all staff members who have stuck with us through our meeting, which is a bit longer than we typically have. That's all we have for the evening. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks on the 18th. So we'll see you all then, hopefully, and looking for motions to adjourn. Motion by Badri, is there a second?
Second.
Alder Furman, second. All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. Have a good night, everyone. We're adjourned.